presentation that goes over everything that you really need to know. And when I say everything, I really mean everything. There's a lot of people who talk about, well, their solution is the best, and this is the real problem, this is the real solution. Perhaps there is a holistic worldview that can actually transcend everything, that can be applied to everything, that studies and details everything. And this is the presentation exactly for that. This is titled Naturosophy, which also may be called Naturosophy, okay, or Naturosophy. So, 3 different ways that I pronounce it as you wish. This is my own form of philosophy that I want to use to specifically detail what I want to specifically detail. It also specifically will tell us a branch of philosophy that I think will detail the most important type of philosophy. Because there's a lot of people out there who see the word philosophy and they may have some negative stigma or they may have some positive stigma. For good reason. We're going to go into defining all these concepts that are mentioned on this beginning slide. The philosophy of natures, of integration and abolition, and the natural moral law. This sums up what is Naturosophy. Okay? Naturosophy. Again, Naturosophy. However you wish to pronounce it, my name is Cory Edmund Endrulat, and this information is based on my second book, my book called Sapientia Naturae. Now this book is pretty detailed when it comes to understanding the natures of all things, and so we're going to get a brief undertone of everything that's in that book. So you don't necessarily need to read it, you can watch this presentation. Now, again, even if you're not into philosophy, you're not into learning new concepts, that is fine. I'm going to guide you through this process. I have a very simple, very bolded presentation here, and I think, my job as the presenter is to keep you captivated. I want you to have an open mind. I'm not claiming to be the only way. In fact, I want people to see every way. And that's the whole point of this presentation, is to have an open mind. But not too closed of a mind either, because we need to have a balance between the two, right? We don't want to be too open-minded, too closed-minded. We want to be open to this information, especially if I think it's really powerful. And of course I'm going to say it's really powerful. I created it. A lot of people are going to say their information, their presentation is the most powerful. You got to learn it. But I think this is the most powerful. And that's based on my observation of many different factors. Come to find out for yourself, I want you to decide for yourself. I want you to be your philosopher, your own. So, let's get into this. Sapientia Naturae is Latin for the wisdom of nature, okay? And Naturosophy, there's 2 relationships between these terms that I chose to use for the beginning of this presentation, and that is the N and the S, which I formed together in the logo that you see in the middle of the screen. Okay, so that logo is essentially an S and an N connected. You can easily make that on your own. I figured it would give a good brand to this philosophy that I'm introducing, to the ideas that I'm presenting. It would do a great service to everything that we're talking about. This information is for truthers, teachers, students, and young adults plus. I also want to emphasize the fact that I am very much about action, and what we will talk about is not just looking at the root causes as to what is happening in the world, but identifying what actions are necessary and required to get rid of the problems and add in the solutions. That requires 2 separate actions, perhaps you may say, as one as well we'll look into. And so if you look forward to action, this is definitely the type of presentation for you as well. Now, why do I say young adults plus? It's because, well, this information does require some reason, some level of critical thought, which you usually would get at a later age. Now, that being said, I mean, hey, if you're younger than a young adult, that's fine, right? If you want to look into this information and take a deep reflection of that, I'm not going to discourage you. But I do know this is the target audience of this presentation. People who want the truth, people who want to teach the truth, and people who want to learn the truth. And I would assume that these things are actually all connected, or at least I would hope they are, because everybody should want to improve their lives and seek out what is necessary for their lives. And so we're going to understand what I mean by that. You will learn a different perspective you've never been told, purely educational, and what I don't see being shared anywhere, okay? So, a different perspective, because nobody that I'm aware of has really studied nature as a philosophy itself. There's a lot of people who either have a positive or a negative connotation of it, or they look at different aspects of nature. Let's focus on this part and that part. And I'm here to look at the whole and say we can apply this philosophy to literally anything, not just human behavior, not just the outcomes of the world, not just morality, but literally everything. Okay? And so we will go over morality, we will be going over different aspects of the world, we will be getting specific on different topics, but I'm just letting you know this could be applied to literally anything. Okay? And you've likely never been told it. And the reason why, even though there's plenty of philosophies out there and there's plenty of people who teach great knowledge, is because it takes perspective sometimes, not just evidence, to see the world around you, right? Something could be right in front of you. The evidence is there, but you still need the perspective to see it. And so it's purely educational. Nothing here is saying you need to buy this, you need to do this. Okay, there might be actions involved, but I'm not going to tell you and say you have to do this, or if you want to continue watching this presentation, you have to do this. No, this is purely educational, purely for thought, analysis. This is what philosophy means, as we'll also break down. And now, it's what I don't see being shared anywhere. That's the whole reason why I made this presentation. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made it. It's a moral obligation on my behalf to say, hey, this information isn't being shared, so thus I must share it. Thus, I must share it with everybody I know, especially if I think it hits at the root to everything going on in our world, right? And again, I'm being honest. I'm just one individual. I'm not claiming it's my way or the highway. I'm claiming that maybe it's that very thing itself that we need to understand, or our very ability to think itself that we need to question. So you will learn what people are looking for, okay? People are looking for solutions. People are looking for a world of freedom. And that's why I can't hesitate when it comes to making this presentation. I have to sit down and say, I have to do it, right? Even if I have to set it up, figure out how to do everything, I have to do it. Because that's how important the knowledge is, in my view, right? And I have that moral obligation because I see the causes and the results, the effects of our world. And I say, well, wait, here are the effects, we're living it, and there must be causes. What are those causes? If we don't recognize those causes, then those effects are just going to keep happening over and over again. So, what people are looking for really is causes. They're looking for answers, however, whether it's in treating a disease or preventing a disease, for example. Treating the world's problems or preventing the world's problems, for example. So, it's a process. And that process is something we're looking for, right? Not a lot of people may want to do that process, but maybe there's different ways you can go about in that process. Again, right now I'm speaking very generalized because we have to break everything down. But the question to you is, where do you look for your answers? Where do you look for what you are looking for? Because if you're looking for something, it really depends on where you're looking currently, right? Oh, I need to find my child, and last time I saw them, they were here and there. Well, if you're not checking here and there, you might not find them. Oh, but maybe he ran off over there. Okay, well, you got a question in your mind, you can find a new answer. You can find out where that child has gone based on that new question that you just inquired for yourself. And so you learn, and the child learns, right? Especially if they understand that you can't find them and they're trying to find you, right? Abandonment, anything of the sort. So there's always scenarios, and I can always connect it to different analogies, but I encourage you also to do that yourself because the connections are ultimately endless. See, I'm not here to tell you the natures of nature. Just because I'm talking about nature does not mean I am the one to say, I know everything about nature. I certainly don't. Okay? I'm not somebody who lives in the wild who knows how to do everything, survive off the grid. I'm not talking about that. Right? I'm talking about a philosophy side of things, a more knowledge-based side of things, based on our current world, based on the world that has ever been, okay, universal and timeless. I'm not here to say I know anything, right? I can only make you think, as Socrates has said in the past. So I am here to simply tell you the philosophy, and we are the messengers. I'm simply delivering that message to you. What you do with that message is up to you. What you discern from what I deliver to you is up to you. You are the filter through which all information goes through. You decide, okay? I'm not here to tell you what to think. I want to get you in how to think. Because if we question what are we looking at, what are we looking for, we're questioning how to think, right? And thus we're learning how to think in the process because we're seeking improvement. We have an open mind. We want to improve, which again, I said in the very beginning, is what this presentation is for. People who want the truth. People who want to start to figure things out. And, you know, of course, I'm going to have some personal bias in this process, but we're going to have to discern through that. I'm here to deliver this information to you as objectively as I can so you can discern for yourself, right? So let's first look at the word philosophy. Philo means love, and Sophia or sophist means knowledge. So philosophy simply means the love of knowledge. You know, it's a shame to me sometimes that a lot of people want to push philosophy down, right? They want to say, well, I don't want to get into philosophical debates and conversations, it's too complicated. Perhaps because it has become too complicated. But does that mean they should not love knowledge? I'm sure that they definitely love knowledge if they love the truth. If they love trying to figure things out. If they love trying to find out what they should do in their life. And everybody has to some degree, some level of philosophy then. Because everybody has knowledge that determines what their actions will be. So philosophy is something we're bound to live by. We're always going to have philosophy. And it is no surprise that people who do introduce philosophies or help improve other pre-existing philosophies may be innovators. They may be the ones that change the world because they're changing the minds of the world. And the minds, again, contribute to the actions contribute to the world. And so because of that, philosophy is very important. Having a love of knowledge, having love of anything is important because what you put your love and your care into is ultimately what grows in this world, right? So how do we treat new philosophers, right? There's people who put it down. There's other people who study all the time and say we need to study this guy and let's look deep into his philosophy and this philosophy. How does the world treat new philosophers? Because if I look at both those sides and say, well, there's people who this philosophy and then there's people who study it all the way, where's the encouragement for people to be their own philosophers? Because shouldn't we think for ourselves? I mean, isn't that the whole point of knowledge and self-improvement, self-awareness, consciousness, is to think for ourselves? Right? Isn't that the whole idea of freedom, which has always been talked about in philosophy we'll get into? So you have to be your own philosopher, and that's what I encourage you to do, okay? Regardless if you want to be or not, I want to encourage you to be your own philosopher. Now, if you look up some of the definitions of philosophy, aside from the love of knowledge, quite frankly, that's what it is, there's also another one that says the body of highest truth, the science of the most fundamental matters. And so I have to ask you, is there anything greater or more fundamental than nature itself? Okay, and so this is why I've particularly decided to focus on this term I use called Naturosophy or Naturosophy. Are we trying to understand nature? Okay, that is the big question. Now you may say everybody's trying to figure out nature, but how much so? Because we live in a world now which is far different from back then, even though we're all still in the same natural world. So what has changed? Us, our actions, and what we've built, perhaps. And so we need to understand not just nature, but ourselves in this process because we're part of nature. So the question is, are we trying to understand nature, or are we trying to find methods to control nature, to be nature, rather than abide to or harmonize or understand nature, to live with it, right? Because there's conflicts that can happen over time if we don't realize what we're doing to ourselves or to our environment. There are actually consequences. We can't just do whatever we want. There are laws that dictate human behavior all the time. If I jump off a cliff, for example, gravity, right? Density, what have you. I'm going to get hurt. and a consequence I cannot avoid. Now, I may not get hurt depending on the nature of my body, how strong I am, able to resist against the ground, the height at which I jumped off of, right? All these other natures that are within the nature of that action. So it's not so easy as generalizing and saying it's black and white. Clearly, there does need to be an introspection, but that depends on the nature of things. And if you look at some of the earliest philosophers, that's what they were trying to do. They said, here are the forms, right, of nature. Here is how we can study nature. And they had many different ways of doing that. And so, not necessarily that I've studied everything that they've studied. I'm here sharing with you my observations that I think are really simple enough to change the world forever. Okay, and that is this philosophy. It's very specific. Let's look at nature. Let's not just look at philosophy. Here is a difference in between philosophy and naturosophy, right? The study of nature for nature versus the study of any knowledge for any purpose, right? Because philosophy, again, just means love of knowledge. Well, what about naturosophy? If we break it down, naturosophy. Sophist means what? Knowledge. So knowledge of nature. Right? That's essentially what it is. Sort of like my second book named The Wisdom of Nature. That's essentially what this is. I'm studying nature for nature. If I'm studying nature to say there's a law that governs how I may be affected if I jump off this cliff, I'm studying nature for my nature because I don't want to get hurt. But philosophy, the study of any knowledge for any purpose. And notice I put knowledge in quotes because that knowledge may not be really helpful to us. There's a lot in philosophy that might be too conceptualized, too wrapped in semantics. And so there is a core difference between naturosophy and philosophy. Naturosophy has the essentials, the universal and timeless, whereas philosophy is semantics or politics. Now, I'm not discounting philosophy because I'm saying naturosophy is a philosophy, but it's a specific type, in my view, because we're not just going to look at politics. We're not just going to look at semantics or certain things, right, that have to do with literally anything. We're going to look at nature because it's the most fundamental matter on this earth. We're going to look at nature because everything has a nature of its own. We're going to get more specific, and we're going to emphasize the internal philosopher because you, by your nature, are supposed to think for yourself. You're not supposed to actually have other philosophers tell you what the world is and what it should be. I told you in the very beginning, you should not take it from me. In the very beginning of my second book as well, I talk about that. I say, everything in this book is meant to actually discount itself. Because I don't want you to take its word, I want you to study the world. It can only ever be a guide. Again, I can only ever be a messenger. And so while philosophy emphasizes the external philosopher, because you have to study this philosophy and that philosophy to know or think about anything at this point, I want to encourage the internal philosopher because you, in your nature, have the ability to think. You have the ability to interpret the world around you, to intake knowledge. So there's no reason why you can't be your own philosopher, okay? So, let's study nature, and let's not just study anything for any purpose, okay? Especially since knowledge is not all the great knowledge, okay? Now, I'll explain more what I mean by that. But first we have a quote, "In every walk with nature one receives far more than he seeks." You always get a lot more from nature than you think. Because if you go outside, you do some yard work, you work in the garden, you learn a lot more than you think. You say, well, what am I really going to learn from that? Isn't it better just watch a video or, a presentation? No, you can actually learn quite a bit in the natural world. The good, the bad, both equally the same. It's a rough world out there. It's not all unicorns and rainbows, and it's not all fantasy related as we see sometimes in movies and TV shows. We get a hard dose of reality, but it teaches us, it prepares us. And so we need to look at it like that. Now, this is a slide from my nature dynamic, which I created. You'll see some other slides from this. And it states the whole nature of anything. So we're going to look into how do we understand the whole nature of anything. But the main point of this slide is to understand that when I say natures with an S, I can either be referring to nature itself or the many natures therein. I'm a nature, right? That camera's a nature. This TV has a nature of its own. The microphone has a nature of its own. The keyboard has a nature of its own. The podium has a nature. Everything has a nature of its own. But then there's the macro nature, which is all of nature, right? So micro, these individual things, macro, the whole world of nature. So there's a difference, and we can put them together and say they're all the natures, okay? And usually when I say natures, I'm referring to the many individual micro things, and I say nature to refer to the whole, okay? But I just want to make that clear because we can say nature for either one, you know, the whole or the small. And I think that's part of the magic of using this term. It's very applicable, and you'll see that when we define what nature is. Nature, from Latin natura, means the course of things, natural character, constitution, quality, the universe, right? So right there it tells us the Constitution. I mean, gosh, when we think of Constitution, we might think of, I don't know, some piece of paper that we wrote up a few thousand years ago talking about freedom and rights and all this stuff, but it was made by man, right? And yet it's supposed to govern everything that people do in certain countries, in certain areas. Well, here's nature, a constitution of its own, and it doesn't have a paper to represent it, doesn't even have a presentation to represent it, because I said I can't speak for nature, nor can you. Really, it is the Constitution, and it is the most important one. It's the natural character, okay? Natural character, the course of things, right? Individual things, everything, right? How things manifest, why? Because of their nature, it's dictated as by it. Now, by the mid-14th century, it's also the forces or processes of the material world, that which produces living things and maintains order. So, you know, the nature is this macro world where it has many processes within, it has many things within. And it has laws, right, which we'll get into. It has things, which I already identified, right? All these things all relate to each other. All these things create an order, right? And maybe it's not always the most orderly, but nonetheless, it has an order, okay? And things are, there's living things, there's non-living things, and essentially everything is existing. Okay, nature just is, it just is that existence. And so it also means creation, the universe, heredity, birth, hereditary circumstance, essential qualities, you know, inherent constitution, innate disposition. Now when it says inherent constitution, it says this is what you have, you're born with it, right? This is something you can't get rid of. Innate disposition, something that's going to happen inevitably because it's dictated by the nature. Sort of like this is the law itself simply by looking at the definition of nature, right? And so the laws of the universe can just be basically summed up as nature itself. And you'll see these are the connections we can make. For example, essential qualities. Well, what makes it essential? The fact that we need it? The fact that we might need to have it, and you know, what would happen without it? What would happen if we went against what we're born with, what we're intended to have? Because it seems like when we say innate disposition or inherent constitution, there seems to be leading some sort of purpose or intent within the universe, something that a lot of the original philosophers talked about, right? And so Egyptian Neter, meaning God, symbolized hieroglyphically as a simple styled flag on a pole, which represented a force which was known to exist through its observable effects, but difficult or impossible to see with the eye. Now, that's another definition for nature that has been used. A lot of people may not know about that, but it actually is symbolized as a flag symbol, okay, and it just means a god. So nature, in this definition, means a god, and it represents a force that you can understand through its effects, that you can observe, which could be hard or impossible to see with the eye, but perhaps you can understand in the brain or as some philosophers said, the heart. And so nature was actually pronounced nature, extremely close to the English pronunciation of nature. So that one is more of a disputed one, okay? But I wanted to include it in here because it is very possible that nature is the etymological root for nature, but nonetheless, all these point to the same definition, that nature is this always all, right? It's within everything. Everything has a nature. There's this macro, there's the micro. So let's go a little bit deeper into this. Nature, the nature all. So nature, if it's something that we can't really undo because it's always here, and if the closer you go with the innate, the whole idea that something is inherent, it would mean that there's something that is really the nature all, or what we might call the natural, right? Now, of course, natural usually refers to of nature. Okay, so when we say nature, and I'm saying it's nature all, I'm looking at the macro here in particular, and I'm saying nature as a whole, as a fabric, as a blueprint to this universe, okay, something that we can't undo, okay, is something that is the most natural, because it is something that is nature itself, right? So if it's of nature, by definition, that's what natural is, then nature itself is the most natural. It is that which contains all that is natural, okay? Because again, natural means of nature, so anything that is of nature is something that is natural. And if we are to look at natural nature, what I mean is true nature, okay? Because people have different ways of saying this, and you'll see there's many terms we use in our day-to-day life that refers to this very same notion. A lot of people in philosophy say you cannot start adding in good and nature together. You can't do that. And I'm going to say, yes, you can, actually. And it all depends on your knowledge of that constitution, that innate disposition, okay, what you are going to do in this life. You're not going to understand nature if you think you can just jump off a cliff with no consequences. You don't understand it, okay? You have knowledge that you need to learn that you haven't learned yet. And nature will tell you by your experience, by your results that you receive, right? Again, observable effects that you receive as the result of your actions, your causes, right? And how you display yourself into the world, nature will receive that message and answer you with your question. Because every action we take is a question, right? What's going to happen when I step here? What's going to happen when I step here? What's going to happen when I put my hand here? What's going to happen all the time? And in philosophy, I'd hope we'd be asking these questions. What's going to happen every time I do this? Every time this happens, right? And so understanding what happens is understanding what is natural to that nature. And nature itself as a macro would be the natural nature, as we mentioned before, the most natural nature, and therefore nature is itself true nature. Because if it is nature, and that is nature, we're saying nature is nature, then it is the truthful nature. It can only ever be the truth. Because can something else be nature? Can I be nature? Can you be nature? Right? We have to live in harmony with nature. And when people say, let's live in harmony with nature, what they usually refer to is living in harmony with natural nature. Okay? Because you need to understand what is of nature to do. There's good, there's bad in nature. It all teaches us, right? As I mentioned before. But if we are to live in harmony with nature, perhaps we need to understand what are we doing with ourselves, our own nature, in relation to the macro nature. Right? What is natural for us to do in relation to the natural world. And so that's a matter of knowledge, as you'll see. And so that's why there's this quote here. It says, look deep into nature and then you will understand everything better. Now, he's not just saying this in one sense. I'm going to say this is literal in the other sense. Meaning that if you understand everything that is better, it's by learning what is natural. Learning about nature. That is looking deep into nature, in my view, is understanding how deep we've got ourselves away from it, or how deep it is that we have delved ourselves thousands of years of experience, that's pretty darn deep, to understand what nature is even more so. we are learning deeply what's happening in today's world simply by learning about nature and relating it to today's world. And saying, well, how is nature perceived nowadays? Do people think about it? Do people understand what is natural, what is not natural? When somebody goes to the store and they look for a natural product, they're assuming it's better. They don't know necessarily if it's better. But they might think, yeah, it's homegrown, it's homemade, it's something that is less man-modified. But do they really know that, right? If you look deep into nature, maybe you'll start to know that, right? Maybe you've grown some food yourself, so you know, direct hand, first experience. Maybe you know how the processing works, the nature of those machineries, the nature of the processing itself. That will help you understand everything better, right? So, it's a pretty generalized quote, right? Look deep into nature. If I'm saying nature is everything, okay? So look deep into everything, or look deep into the truth, if we're talking about the true nature or what is natural. But to understand everything better, not only are we understanding better by learning and by our time worth of experience, we are understanding everything that is better, I'm going to apply to this sense, because we're understanding nature, right? And we're understanding what is natural to do. Now, again, in philosophy, they do not like the fact I am adding a bias here between what is nature and what is good. We're going to cover this in detail. And here you see I have a slide detailing this in a comparison between the natural and the unnatural. The natural is that of nature. The unnatural is that not of nature. The natural has always existed, okay? And the unnatural has not always existed. The natural involves the knowledge and embrace. The unnatural is the ignorance and disregard, okay? Very important right there. You understand that. The difference between knowledge and ignorance. And then the natural is also for nature, and it does the naturalizing, and the unnatural is against nature, and it does the denaturing. So when I say something is of nature, I refer to it being natural. If I say something is for nature, I'm also saying it's something that is for nature, it's natural, but that's because it's naturalizing. It's allowing us to create the natural. So we start from the unnatural, right? Maybe there's parts of our world that we need to make more natural. So we would be naturalizing to become more of nature. And therefore we would become natural. Now obviously these are very generalized senses of explanations I'm giving you here, but this is a chart that's going to go basically into everything we're going to be talking about in this presentation, and more, and with direct examples. So if you're confused about this slide, do not worry. I would expect it, because everything that's in here we're going to have to break down to understand. The natural is the Wu Wei plus the Ziran, which are Taoist concepts for the effortless and the natural. And that is essentially the philosophy of let what shall be, and for the natural to be natural, it must be natural. It's also another way of saying live and let live, right? Just live your life. Embrace what's going on in your life. Attain knowledge as to learn what to do, what to embrace. Versus the unnatural, it says, you know what, let's ignore the knowledge, let's disregard, let's not embrace it. Let's try to change things. Let's try to denature things away from their natural condition, and go against nature. And maybe they say it's not going against nature, but they put an emphasis on the fact that man has to change what is nature. That there is no natural authority to look at. There's no inherent constitution or innate disposition, even though it's literally in the term nature. They're going to say, no, nature is our playground. We can do whatever we want with it. And I actually agree, it is our playground. But we can't just do whatever we want with it. Okay, just because we have the ability to change things does not mean we should change everything. It's not to say that we aren't going to try or attempt to, but what is the result of us trying to attempt to do that? What is the result of us doing that over many thousands of years? Perhaps we've been failing. Perhaps we've been making mistakes for all these many thousands of years, and we don't realize it. And so, when we have this man-made authority, nature is not the authority, right? Because it's man saying, I should be the person you look up to. I should be the one that decides how things work. Not nature, not learning from the natural world, but learning from purely just man. This is very dangerous, and it's basically the philosophy of let what shall be not become, and for the unnatural to be unnatural, it must be unnatural. Creating a world based on man's opinion, based on man's whims, based on our desires, our instincts, but not necessarily what is intended of this world, what must persist, what is our destiny, what is period, right? Because that all constitutes nature. And if you want to say, well, we can change this and I can make things work accordingly to my will and how I want things to get done with a complete disregard to the natural world, you're going to seep into the unnatural. So, there's a better chart to describe this when we break all this down. And again, we learn to help our own living. That's the whole point of learning. Otherwise, we wouldn't learn. We learn to earn. And we learn to discern. At the same time, we are making differences and polarities and all sorts of things, all to help us learn in this life. Everything we do should be a learning process because we can learn from everything. So, we learn to help our own living quite literally, because what's the point of learning that jumping off a cliff is going to hurt us? To help us live. To help us live naturally, which means what? Living our life naturally. Being, presence, right? Simply existing. But we can't exist if we're always in turmoil and always in distress. We see the lifespan go down, we see obesity rates, we see disease. Perhaps it's all correlated to this idea of the natural and the unnatural. Everything. Again, not just action, not just behavior, but everything we do to ourselves and to others. Both, to the environment as well. All of it can be deduced to the natural and unnatural. I know I'm making big claims here, but this chart also sums it up quite well. The natural is where you think, say, and act from knowledge or embrace, okay? So knowledge or embrace of, and you see I have an infinity symbol, because that stands for natural authority. You were questioning perhaps, what is the natural authority? Well, if it's not man, well, what is? It is what is. It is what has always existed. And therefore, because it has always existed, it is the infinity. It is the forever. What is natural is something that has always existed, as we mentioned in the previous chart. So therefore, the natural authority is that which is, has always been, and never will change. And we must understand that. Because as humankind, what are we? Are we permanent? Are we always there? Are we forever? You may say, well, we reproduce, but our mind recycles, our body recycles itself. Even the earth recycles itself, but the laws, and that of which determines how things will manifest, that remains. That always remains. Nobody can change that. And so, when we have knowledge or embrace of that infinity, of that forever, that natural authority, we can naturalize, which again means to create the natural, right? And we'll break that down a bit more. If we look at the unnatural, it's when we think, say, or act from the lack or the disregard of the natural. So, the unnatural is not really adding anything new into existence, is it? All it's doing is taking from the natural and twisting it, which is all evil can do. If I'm saying that what is natural is good and what is unnatural is bad, for example, which is a comparison I'm going to make. Again, a lot of philosophers don't want to make that comparison. They're afraid. They think you cannot do that, right? So, the lack or disregard of the natural is the unnatural, And that is by man-made authority, because it's man saying, well, who cares about nature and what nature wants? If we change this and change this, then this will work. You know, we can justify our own man-made creations that way too. We can say, well, if we change this and change that, then we can make this work. And I'm going to have specific examples as to that, as to what I mean by that. And essentially what that does is it denatures humankind. It denatures us. It makes us less human. And so when we have any sense of humanization, right, that means that we are becoming more human. Inversely, dehumanization is what we say when we're not becoming more human, we're actually becoming less human. So there's a big difference. It's the same thing between saying naturalizing and denature, right? So that is the difference between, you know, the natural and the unnatural, is what supports nature and what doesn't. And so when Socrates says there is only one good knowledge and one evil ignorance, I think he means that quite literally, okay? Not just saying that, like, oh yeah, there's one good knowledge and one evil ignorance. That literally is what is good and what is bad. Knowledge and ignorance. Because if you have knowledge of nature and you're not ignorant of nature, you are promoting the natural, because you know what to do. And you're not just believing it, you're not being deceived, because that's not knowledge. You know what to do. You're not ignorant. You're not disregarding it. So, there's another quote. Ignorance, the root and stem of all evil. The root and stem. Another quote, and again, you know, that was from Socrates, and this one's from Plato. All philosophers, some of the oldest, some of the most respected of the times, right? They started a lot of things. And they said, ignorance is the root to all evil. I wonder why. Perhaps it's because we're ignoring what is. And you can say, well, what about ignoring, you know, the bad? You know, that's good, right? Ignoring the bad? No. Why should you ignore the bad? You can learn from the bad. You embrace it to understand it, but not that you actually fully embrace it. You don't want to live with it. You don't want to have it in your life. You want to know what to do with it. This is knowing what to take. This is time and place. We're going to look deeper into these concepts. Even Aristotle said too, let's just throw him in with the rest, all men by nature desire to know. Knowledge is something that we need to have. Now, even if everybody doesn't desire to know, perhaps by nature they desire to know. See what I mean? It's not that they desire to know, because not everybody desires to know. Some people want to stay in ignorance. But even if they want to stay in ignorance, by their nature, they desire to know. They need to know. Because if they don't know, they will cease to be human. They will cease to be of nature. They will cease to be natural. And therefore they will lose every essence of that makes them mankind. They will no longer be human. Very important if we're moving into a technological age with consumerism, materialism, that we understand these concepts. Here you have another quote from Nikola Tesla, right? Somebody who's greatly respected for inventions and things that, you know, we actually have today. Doesn't get a lot of credit though. Interesting. He says, of all the frictional resistances, the one that most retards human movement is ignorance. What Buddha called the greatest evil in the world. The friction which results from ignorance can be reduced only by the spread of knowledge and the unification of the heterogeneous elements of humanity. Meaning the different elements of humanity, bringing the different parts of humanity together and saying this is what knowledge is, and that is what can defeat ignorance. He says no effort could be better spent. So the most important thing is knowledge. And if you look at, I mean, gosh, there's dozens of quotes. It should be obvious to anyone that knowledge is important. And that you can't just disregard it, throw it into the rug and say, well, this is important. Economics, politics, all that still relies on knowledge. You don't know what to do with your money, you can't have any money. You don't know what to do with politics, politics is going to whip you in the butt, right? You don't have knowledge of yourself, you're going to lose the whole deal. Knowledge relies on everything. and everything relies on knowledge. So, knowledge really is this tying block between the natural and the unnatural, between nature and ourselves. The world owes you nothing. It was here first, said Mark Twain. Well, that interestingly goes alongside the idea that I said that, hey, the natural is what has always existed. It was here first. It's something that must be respected, something that must be learned from, something that you can't go against, because that would make you go against essentially yourself. Nature is not a place to visit, it is home. Well, that is another quote that basically says, hey, nature is always here. It's not some temporary thing, it's something that has always existed. Again, and then if we were to say what is natural, well, let's think. Is this man-made fruit that has never existed before natural? Well, not only is it man-made, quite literally, it tells you, but that implies that it's temporary and that it's not always existent, and therefore it's not as natural. Is that to say it's not good? This is the conflict that people see in philosophy. We have to understand what that means, okay? Maybe it depends on other natures. Maybe instead of having such a limited worldview to say, well, you can't say that what is natural is good, how about you understand more as to what is natural and what is unnatural, right? Maybe there are certain aspects as to the unnatural that provide the natural, but then it wouldn't be unnatural by definition. After you have exhausted what there is in business, politics, conviviality, and so on, have found that none of these finally satisfy or permanently wear, what remains? Nature remains. These are very infamous writers, right? And Walt Whitman, Mark Twain, Gary Snyder, these guys, I mean, they're all saying the same thing here, that nature is this permanent thing that needs to be understood, right? And we have to, by our nature, because we're in nature, we're inhabitants. It's like, wow, I'm in a video game, and if I don't understand how the game works, I'm basically going to fail the game. Voila, here's real life. And if you don't understand how life works, you're probably not going to succeed in that life. And by success, I don't mean material gain, man-made things, necessarily, right? I mean nature itself, your abidance to nature. This is why Naturosophy is so important, because we have to look at nature itself and what is natural and unnatural, which so much of philosophy doesn't want to do, and they just throw it all under the rug. It's a shame, frankly. So, a disregard of nature, which again we consider as unnatural, is giving nature away. But the question is, where is it going, right? And can you really give nature away, right? Nature is always here, it's with you, you have the nature of your body. If you're saying, well, I'm going to disregard it, it's not mine, it's yours. In the case of slavery, for example. Well, where is it going? It's going with the master, the person who says, yeah, I'll take it. Oh, well, you're not in control of yourself. That makes you more vulnerable. I can take your body. That's mine now. Does it belong with him naturally? But because you naturally got rid of it, you can create a scenario and he can try to justify it and say, you know what, yeah, it's natural for that to happen. Let's have slavery. And that's what happened for thousands of years. Thousands of years. Ignorance is the same thing as the disregard of nature, right? I said ignorance or disregard. Where does ignorance bring us? Just frankly, right? We talked about how ignorance is this great evil. Well, why is it so evil? Where does it bring us? Does it help us at all to be ignorant, right? When has ignorance ever helped us? People say ignorance is bliss, okay? To try to cope and try to get away from the problems, try to not face reality. But what is reality? Is reality nature? Because what is reality? It's what always existed, it's what's here, it's truth. Well, truth is reality, is nature, is good. What's going on, Cory? You're equating all these words together? Maybe it's because they are connected in the very first place. And ignorance wants to keep us away from all of that. It brings us nowhere, okay? It brings us to confusion. It brings us to chaos. It brings us to the lack of responsibility, the lack of self-ownership, right? All these things because it's the lack of nature, the lack of the natural. All those things, ownership, responsibility, those are supposed to be natural. because they are. Only you own yourself, do you not? Only you should be responsible of yourself, are you not supposed to? So when you disregard that and say, I'm not supposed to, you're going to be among the unnatural. You're giving way to the unnatural when you say, I don't need to do what is truthful, what is right, what is real, what is healthy, what is honest. Because guess what? All those words mean the same. So if you mean to tell me that this means nothing, natural and unnatural, right? And that in relation to good and bad, it means nothing, then try living your life without these words. Try living your life without saying any of these words, and I promise you, you can't do it. Because by your day-to-day life, every day, by knowledge, you are discerning for yourself what you should and should not do. You are determining what is natural and what is unnatural for me to do. Well, it's natural for me to go to sleep, right? So that's why I go to sleep every single day. Oh, it's natural for me to eat. So that's why I eat every single day. But it's not natural to say, well, man, I shouldn't do this ever, man. You know, I should ignore what my body's telling me. I should totally, follow this person who says I should do this and that, or follow this religion, this political party that tells me to do this and that with my nature. Is nature really important to you if you're willing to follow man-made authority in one form or another? Because by definition, following man-made authority is giving way to the lack of the natural. Since what is natural is of nature, it's what has always existed. Man has never always existed. Therefore, no man can ever be the answer of another man. Nature can always be the answer for every man, because nature is here for every man. It always is. So you may be lonely, but you're not alone. This is something Ralph Waldo Emerson and the transcendentalists were talking about within their works, is that nature is always here, always there for you, right? And that way, when you go in solitude, when you think for yourself, you reflect in nature, you may be with birds and trees. It doesn't make you lonely. You're with the world, right? And then you actually get clearer thoughts. And people refer to it as the greatest physician, the greatest doctor, the greatest teacher, the greatest writer, the greatest artist. And all humans are trying to do is imitate what has already been existent, what has already been created, what already is. And that's all humans can do. I'm not to say that humans are powerless and that we should do nothing, okay? I'm saying that we need to respect what is here, and we need to understand what that respect means. And that first means understanding that all these words correlate with one another, right? We're going to be honest for honesty, right? Or we're going to be healthy for health. We're going to be righteous or rightful for what is right, just as we would be becoming more natural for what is nature, or we would have more natural things in our diet for our nature, or for nature itself, for the forever, right? And that's how we live longer, closer to forever, wherever we can live. But, we can be also what's most truthful as we can, as truthful as we can. It's for the truth. We can be as honest as we can. We can be as real, down to earth, really real for reality, right? It's no coincidence we use these terms. They're all one and the same. So if I say, hey, this is really good, I'm saying this is naturally natural. So other words for natural would be real, truthful, rightful, healthy, honesty, just, justice, standard, genuine, moral, morality, regular, correct, sensible, reasonable, unforced, fundamental, whole, essential, ... etc. The list goes on forever. Okay? You get the point, hopefully, is that these all relate to understanding nature, right? There's many ways people have understood nature. I'm going to say, even too, that, the philosophers of the past and all these people, they understood nature too, just in their own essence of understanding it, and they used different terms and different ways to share with it. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. Right? So let's look at the unnatural. It's basically the total opposite. You got dishonesty for the dishonest, which is lying for the lie. You got unhealthy for the unhealthiness, right? You got wrongful for the wrong, or what is considered error. You got untruthful for the untruth, right? You got the unreal for the not really real. I mean, it's no coincidence. You got fake, artificial, illusory or illusion, unjust, injustice, immoral, immorality, abnormal, aberrational, right? Forced, pretended, feigned, contrived, incorrect. Interesting we use these terms too, right? Aberrational. The word rational is in it, which refers to knowledge, but aberrational. Not having knowledge. I mean, it's literally in the word. Abnormal. Well, what is normal? What can ever be normal, right? It's like saying utopia versus dystopia. What can ever be a utopia? The closest thing is nature itself. So that is the normal. That is the closest thing to normal, which is far from normal, as we may say everything is just one way. Nature works in many different ways. Everything is unique within nature. We'll talk about that. We're going to get very specific. What are these laws? What are these things within nature that we can identify, right? That constitutes how nature operates. But right here tells you everything, right? What is natural and what is unnatural. I mean, this chart is telling you that there's words we use on a day-to-day basis that all mean essentially the same stuff here. The difference between the natural and the unnatural. Here you have another quote. Generally, the lie is a denatured truth. Says it just as is. Drama occurs when this truth is still non-existent, and it must become existent for the human being. Notice she says a denatured truth, because that would imply it's unnatural. And because the truth is unnatural, it's no longer the truth. Therefore, it's a lie. Drama occurs when this truth is still non-existent, because having nature not harmonized within your life, you're going to feel like something's missing. Something is not there. Something that's there is not supposed to belong there too. And it must become existent. She says it must, implying a bias, implying a purpose, implying an intent, implying a reason, right? Implying that something needs to occur. And again, in philosophy, they want to say meaning, value, purpose, intent. We can't study these things because it doesn't have to do with cause and effect. It adds emotional bias to them. Nonsense. They're important to talk about. They're all important to talk about. Everything is knowledge. If you really love knowledge, you call yourself a philosopher, and don't limit your philosophy, because I would call that limited philosophy, But that's not what philosophy is supposed to be. Philosophy is a love of all knowledge. Doesn't matter what kind. Naturosophy is looking at nature in particular and what is natural and unnatural, right? Just one form of philosophy, but one I think is rather important because it deals with the most fundamental matters of philosophy, which is what philosophy is supposed to study in the first place. All good things are wild and free. Again, in the literal sense, all good things. Good as in righteous, as in truthful, as in natural, as in honest, as in real. Okay? Henry David Thoreau, transcendentalist. Wholeness or health is our natural state. The nature of healing involves removing obstructions to this natural state and bringing individuals into alignment with themselves and their world. Free of these obstructions, an individual's innate intelligence and self-regulating capabilities will guide him toward a state of well-being. So, that right there correlates health and nature together. Not just looking at what is good is wild and free as to say that good is nature, but also what is health is nature. And let's look at more. Nature is doing her best each moment to make us well. Why, nature is but another name for health. There we see Henry David Thoreau again, right? Nature is but another name for health. Because it is. What is healthy is what is good, is what is natural, is what is real. Hope you start to make these connections now and start to see, and when you do it in your day-to-day life, you start to realize you're assuming it's natural for you to do, and that's why you do it in the first place. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. Nature itself is the best physician, by Hippocrates. True health fundamentally means to be in tune with nature, both inner and outer. True health. True implies what? It implies the natural. So natural health fundamentally means to be in tune with nature, which makes sense. Because nature and what is natural means of nature, right? So health of nature means to be in tune with nature. Perfect sense to me. Everything we see in nature is manifested truth, only we are not able to recognize it unless truth is manifest within ourselves. That is where knowledge is emphasized, and you see truth is correlated to nature. Again, what is truthful and what is natural is one and the same. Your nature is truth, and when you oppose it, you don't feel like yourself. Stress never feels as natural as peace does. Perhaps it's because you're not supposed to. It's not natural to your nature to feel unhealthy, because health is nature, truth is nature, honesty is nature, right? It is what is natural. Because the most honest can ever be nature, if it is what always existed, what is truthful, and what can ever be. So your nature is truth, and you cannot oppose it. If you were to say, well, let's disregard it, well, you're lying to yourself. You're deceiving yourself. Okay, and so you are not going to feel like yourself for that reason. You're going to turn yourself into a new image, right? An attempted image. And that's what we do nowadays. We're so obsessed with image that we often disalign ourselves to our natural image, to who we naturally are. And so we lose a sense of self until we go through a bunch of other man-made loops until we find ourselves we still don't. Because we still don't understand the simple dynamic between nature, what is natural and what is unnatural. If one way be better than another, that you may be sure is nature's way. Very important that Aristotle uses the word way here, because we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But if one way be better than another, in the sense of good, that you may be sure to know is nature's way, right? The best and shortest road toward knowledge of truth is nature. Knowledge, if it's a knowledge that helps your nature, is natural knowledge, as we'll look into later. Truth is nature. So we can just say the naturalist road toward natural or nature is nature. Like, oh, well, the shortest road to nature is nature. Well, start using your own nature for nature. That makes perfect sense. The best and shortest road toward the knowledge of nature is nature. Maybe that's called using our brain, thinking, knowledge, right? Empathy, conscience, anything that is within our nature to understand nature, because we were given it, right? We were born with that ability. And it's what we're supposed to do, as we mentioned before. This is from an ancient Egyptian proverb. Here you see, nature's book always contains the truth. We must only learn to read it. See, there's a lot of people who say that we need to learn how to learn. And I'm okay with that, right? Because I said, hey, I'm not here to tell you what to think. I want to help you in how to think. But I can only help you. And you were given all the tools you need. Why do we assume that there is a need for some sort of man-made thing to help us learn what is natural for us to do for what is nature? See, a lot of people want to use a lot of different tools, and I have no problem with that if it assists the natural, right? But there's a difference between a textbook that says, hey, this is what happened, and this is something you have to question. Did it really happen? Could it really have happened? How would it have happened? Can it happen again? Because that is understanding, well, your nature, right? How you learn, and how things can happen again, how history can repeat itself. And so nature's book tells us and teaches us again and again, and may recite passages over and over again to the human species, and we may not understand it because history is repeating itself over and over again, right? Or we might think, oh, well, we're doomed to repeat it. Well, if we think that, then are we really learning? Do we really understand nature? Why is it that we're so at conflict with ourselves and the world so often in today's world? Why are so many people at conflict with themselves, right? That doesn't seem so right to me. It doesn't seem so natural to me if they're of their own nature, right? They should understand that then. And so we must learn to read ourselves, read the world around us. That's something that always we have to do. We can't necessarily get it from any other source. We shouldn't be dependent on those sources because the truth, nature is always around us, and nature we are born with. So it's simply a matter of emphasis, simply a matter of naturalization. I am entering into the truth, into nature. Nature and truth are one and immutable and inseparable as beauty and love, which are two concepts that are often talked about in relationship to nature as well. To talk about nature and truth in the same respect, right? Say that these are connected. You can't disconnect these from each other. So if we look at our terminology and we look at those previous quotes, for example, we see that something is really something else. If we are to say that, we're really saying something is naturally something else. So if I say something is really this, then I'm saying something is naturally this. And if I say something is really good, I'm saying something is naturally natural. And if I say something is sad, I'm saying something is more unnatural. Okay, because I'm relating these terms all to each other. I want you to understand that. The good makes us happy because, by definition, that's what makes it good. The fact that there is knowledge, the fact that we understand its effects, right? The fact that we know what to do based on those effects, based on what we receive as a result of what we put out there. We reap what we sow. And so healthiness is happiness because it's moral, it is correct, it is natural. We say healthiness, health is the greatest wealth. Happiness is health, and thus happiness is the greatest wealth. Well, happiness and healthiness are one and the same, because you can't be happy without being healthy, and you can't be healthy without being happy, and you can't be natural without being healthy. So these are all connected. You cannot disconnect these terms from each other, and this is why we will say, man, that's really sad that happened, Oh, that's sad that the world has gotten to where it is, because it's unnatural. It's not in a place it should be, right? If that thing shouldn't have happened to that individual, this thing shouldn't have happened to this world. And so we say it's sad, the same way we may say it's bad, right? And that's why we get mad about it, right? But it's all because of this core distinction between the natural and the unnatural. Nothing leads to good that is not natural. The quote says it again, right? Equating what's natural with what is good. For nature is good, and man is by nature good. It is civilization which ruins him. So this is a core distinction we need to make now too. Because just because I'm saying that nature, essentially all that's ever existent, and we need to align our actions to it, I'm not saying nature itself is good. But can we really say it's bad? Right? We live with it. We have to live with it. Basically, we have to learn to live with it, We can do bad to ourselves, right? If we don't learn to live with it. So we can say nature just exists, or we can say it's good, or we could say it's bad too, and therefore that's a reason why we must always be improving. The same way where some people in religions will say, well, we're born with sin, and other people say, no, we're not born with sin. We're actually born perfect. There's some people who claim that in the past. And you know what? They both validate under this view, because it's all a matter of understanding perspective. Just as I said, no one is born good or bad. It depends on the natures, their upbringing. It depends on how those natures come to be, right? But what is natural is good, right? And man is by nature, if they're of nature, yeah, that's good. So I agree with this quote. And man is by nature, if they're of nature, then yeah, they're good. And it is civilization which ruins him. Yeah, if civilization is unnatural. See, obviously there's dependencies. You need to be able to discern. You need to be able to look at these quotes and say, what are they trying to convey? What do they mean when they say this? Nature knows no indecencies, man invents them. Literally claiming that man is what twists what is nature, what is natural. Mark Twain said this, right? Nature knows no indecencies. So, because nature already exists, it is truth, it's what is forever, man can only take that and say, let's turn into this, let's turn into that. So is it really nature's fault, or is it ours if we get bad results from it? If we touch a poison over and over again that's natural, it's of nature, is it natural for me to touch that poison over and over again? When am I going to learn? When does the blame go on me, not just on nature, for that result condition? Right? You say, oh my gosh, this plant poisoned me, but I still keep touching it. It's my fault. Because I'm the one who keeps touching it. I still have never learned from it. How can I say I understand nature at all, and therefore to say it's good or bad? Because I'm not learning from it. Right? So we'll talk about this in the appeal to nature, which philosophies and philosophers just hate to talk about. They don't like addressing this subject. I felt my lungs inflate with the onrush of scenery, air, mountains, trees, people. I thought, this is what it means to be happy. This is what it is to be happy, right? And it's no coincidence, right? And especially when people get out of their office jobs, their deep, unnatural scenarios where they go to the country, they relax, their sleep improves, their health improves, everything improves. It's not a coincidence. It's because they really needed nature. And people have a natural connection to nature. You can't undo that tie. You can attempt to, but you never can actually undo it. One of the first conditions of happiness is that the link between man and nature shall not be broken, by the great Leo Tolstoy. And, man and nature, again, that's us. That's us in our world, which we are ever bound to. We can't get rid of it. We cannot break that bound. And so if we want to be happy, we have to learn to live with it, right? We have to learn to embrace and say, this is what it is, okay? And the world's not all great. But once we practice it, once we learn how to deal with it, guess what? It becomes easier. No coincidence, because it becomes healthier, becomes better for us. We cannot live better than in seeking to become better. Right there saying, we need to use our nature for nature. We need to seek out being better by being natural to attain the natural. To be happy, we must be true to nature and carry our age along with us. So regardless of age, because nature is always existent, regardless of our temporary being, we need to look at this forever world. If we want to be natural, as it is to be true, of nature, we need to be nature itself. We need to harmonize. We need to be more natural to nature, to our own nature, and then carry our age with us, and then, hey, we'll be happy because we are aligned. But we need to understand again that this is only one perspective of the natural world. Of course, it's a holistic one that I think will encompass everything. But this can only ever be a guide, okay? This can only ever be something that assists you in your natural nature and to the natural, right? Everything we do, if we think it's going to improve human behavior, we're saying, and we're making a claim, is saying, this is going to assist what is natural. This is what's going to assist our nature in our pursuit of happiness, our pursuit of nature. And so, if we want to attain right, we have to have a guide to get there, and many different guides. And this can only be one. Okay, you must discern from the information that I provide in this entire presentation for yourself to understand and really guide yourself in this process of truth, of nature. So religions, the occult, traditions, a lot of these things will save or help people. That's likely due to the right or healthy guides, right? Because these things can really help people because they're providing what is essential for them in their nature. Not that it is inherently essential, that it is the answer for everything they need to know. Because there is no one right guide, there is no one right action. You can claim and say, well, love and happiness and kindness is the one action that everybody needs to do. It's the one right action. But is it the only one? Because there's times where we're going to need to express anger. There's times where we need to address what is negative, and we can't just be all happy about it, right? We can't just be and say, well, we can all just love each other all the time. And even when something bad happens, we still love each other. No, we need to take a defense. We need to understand what's happening. We need to, if necessary, prepare ourselves, right? And do the things and be able to apply the good and the bad as due, right? But, anger, for example, is something that people might see as bad. But what if it's necessary because something bad happens to someone and that anger is what drives that bad person away? Or it's what gets the good people up and moving, starting to do something. It actually can be a very helpful force, depending on its time and place, its usage, the use of its embrace. So understand that, right? There is no one right action, there is no one right guide. This presentation can only be one. Thomas Paine states, "But such is the irresistible nature of truth, that all it asks and all it wants is the liberty of appearing." So, the nature of nature, all it wants to do is appear. All it wants to do is be present, right? The sun needs no inscription to distinguish him from darkness, right? Now, there's a reason why, of course, we have separate words for nature and truth and health and such, to be a little bit more specific, but these are all one and the same, right? And so, when we're talking about this, we're saying, hey, nature wants to be seen, nature wants to be utilized, nature is here for all of us. Why aren't we using it? Why aren't we understanding it? The sun needs no inscription to distinguish him from darkness, saying it doesn't need any pieces of paper, it doesn't need any declaration, it doesn't need any law to dictate what it's going to do. It's going to do what it wants to do anyways, because it is the law, right? It's the law that can't be changed. And so it's going to rise, it's going to fall, it's always going to persist in its motions, and that is what nature does, right? And people will say, well, there's randomness and there's reason, there's all this randomness in nature, but then how come we see patterns that always happen, right? And then even that randomness, you're claiming to know what that is, which claims to have some sort of claim on some sort of order that goes on within that randomness. So people contradict themselves all the time within their own arguments, right? Say, oh, philosophy's bad. Meanwhile, they have a philosophy that philosophy is bad, right? Oh, everything is moral relativism. There's no such thing as good and bad. Well, then you're claiming to know that it's good or that it's right to say that there is no right or wrong. See, there's so much contradiction and within our own arguments that people don't realize it all the time, right? And so we simply need to embrace what is here, right? That's why I said knowledge or embrace. All it wants is to appear. It simply must be embraced. It's there, it's saying, hey, with open arms, I'm here, I'm nature. And mankind, we're at question, right? For that answer that is always there, waiting for us, able to be used. The highest truth needs no communicating, for it is by its very nature self-propelling. It radiates its influence silently as the rose, its fragrance without the intervention of a medium. So, I don't need to be the one to deliver the truth, because the truth will deliver itself through the effects and through the actions of the world, right? But I can assist, I can guide, right? Nature is self-propelling, right? And I can't even put words into perspective of how nature operates, because that's how powerful and complex nature is. No one can. No human can do that. And to claim to do that is a very problem within itself, perhaps. But, Gandhi's saying here, it radiates its influence silently as the rose its fragrance without the intervention of a medium, right? So it radiates without the need of a material thing, without the need of a presentation, a me, a religion, an ideology, anything. It doesn't need that middleman to radiate to people, okay? It doesn't need that. It's by its nature self-propelling. That's not to say these mediums won't come about by us to try to help people to recognize that self-propelling nature, because we will try to help that natural communication communicate to the average people. We might want to help that communication reach more people, and that's why we communicate here in presentations. So, naturalizing and denaturing. Two concepts we talked about before. Naturalizing is when you think, say, or act what supports or gives to the natural. And denaturing is when you think, say, and act what violates or steals from the natural. So here are two distinct differences. A lot of people may either want to focus on one or the other, right? In the case of health, maybe we want to look at just what's naturalizing. Like, hey, what do we got to do to solve this problem? But how did the problem come about in the first place, We got to look at the other side. And then other people want to look at just this side of all this wrongdoing because they think, well, then we'll understand what is right. If we understand what is wrong, we can know what's right. Or if we understand what's right, we can know what's wrong. Yeah, sure. But why not understand both? And here is both. You can either support or give to the natural, or you can violate and steal from the natural. Because again, Evil and what is bad can never create anything new. It can only take from what already exists and change it, right? Violate it. That's what it means. Violence. Violate. And so it's stealing from, whereas naturalizing would be giving to, right? For it is according to nature, and nothing is evil which is according to nature. This is a quote from Marcus Aurelius, somebody who is considered a Stoic, right? And Stoicism is another philosophy which deals with accordance to nature. Here you see another quote, things always work according to their nature, by C.S. Lewis. And here, again, if I were to look at this in the literal sense, things always work according to their nature. Things always work. They always work. According, however, when they're according to their nature, when they're natural. But they don't work when they're not. They don't work if they're not according to nature. If a plant cannot live according to its nature, it dies, and so a man. Henry David Thoreau, right? If we're not living according to our nature, we will die. We will not survive. We will not know what to do. And this is the importance of knowledge, one way or another, right? Whether it's instinct, conscience, or whatever way, if you can attain knowledge of your nature, you are understanding what is natural to do, right? And I said there's many ways you can learn. We'll talk about learning soon. But let's first talk about change, the nature of change. Nature versus nurture is something that is talked about all throughout psychology and all throughout many different people. They talk about this whole relationship, nature versus nurture. And I think the word versus does us a great disservice, because the word versus implies that the two are against each other when they're not. Both contribute to each other. It constitutes a cycle. What you start with is a nature that nurtures, right? Or a nurture that turns into a nature, whatever, chicken or the egg, right? You got the nurturing aspect, okay, which is the naturalizing or the denaturing side of things, right? That turns into a nature, all right, which determines if it's natural or unnatural, right? If it's naturalizing a nature, it's going to turn into something natural. If it's denaturing a nature, it's going to turn into something unnatural. So, nurture to nature, to nurture to nature, to nurture to nature. It goes like that forever. Because from the natural, the unnatural nature, that's going to help determine what's going to come next, right? Everything works together. So, to put this into more practical application, when people are born into this world, right, we say they have genetics. We say they're born with certain qualities, or they're able to have this or that according to their nature. How did they get that nature? Had to be through some sort of nurturing process. And then how do you create new natures after that? Has to be through some sort of nurturing process. But that implies then if you can create something new and you can nurture something into something else, that you're creating a new nature that then has to be nurtured again. And how are you going to nurture in the first place without a nature that you are distinguishing and saying that's a nature? So nature versus nurture is always present, it's always here, it's something that we're always going to utilize, both equally the same, it's a cycle. Here you see a quote, nurture nature and nature will nurture you. Nurture the nature for a beautiful future. Nature does nothing uselessly. Nature does everything for a reason, right? And Aristotle, he says this, and many other philosophers talk about this. People will say it is all random. I'm okay with that, right? I have no problem with that. But everything still has a cause and effect, and that is a law of nature. So even if you recognize and say, well, this happens randomly because of this, you're still saying because. You're still implying some sort of order. You're still implying that something is happening because of a certain reason. So here we have an image, good morning, let's make the right choice, let's make the natural choice. It's time we stopped fighting about who created the world and started fighting those who are destroying it, right? So instead of talking about, oh, well, this God and this person, and oh, well, this civilization came about to this history and that history, we actually start looking at, well, who's destroying it right now, right here, presently, in our environment? Can we understand it? Is, to some extent, ourselves responsible? Probably. We're probably partly responsible, especially if we know it's happening, right? then we're partially consenting. We're saying, well, yeah, we know this thing is happening, and what are we going to do to stop it? We got to do something. We got to spread awareness, right? And so we'll talk about this more, but I think it's a really good image because it talks about making the right choice and not being distracted about things that don't really matter so much. You might say, yeah, it is important to look at who created the world, but who's destroying it, right? Because what already is here, if we understand nature, is something that's always been here, right? That's what God has provided, or whoever has provided, right? It's what is here that is for the human use. And yet we have these people over here that want to destroy it, or people who are ignoring it, or people who are disregarding it. That's what it means to denature. That's what it means to create something unnatural. So, if we want to create the natural, we should probably understand what is unnatural. Again, vice versa. So if we were to look deeper at naturalization, this is a very important word because we kind of hijacked it in today's society. No surprise, since everything that is unnatural takes away from the natural. Again, what is denaturing is something that steals from or violates the natural. That's all evil can do, is take something that is natural and change it to the unnatural. So, to naturalize, if we just look at the word naturalize, it literally means to make or conform into the natural. So, let's look at real naturalization versus fake naturalization, otherwise known as natural naturalization and unnatural naturalization, because I'm saying this word has been hijacked in today's society. Let me ask you, when you hear the word naturalization, what is the first thing that you think about? You probably think about becoming a citizen in a country with a government. And let me ask you, how natural is that? Okay? I want to know your response to that, because this slide really details much about this term that we use to say naturalization. Think about what you're saying when you say, well, I need to naturalize my child into this country. Think about that for a moment. Okay? Let's start actually with the fake naturalization, this one that everybody's familiar with. It's unnatural because it's recognition of being born in government, which is man-made, and that's conforming to government, making the unnatural natural. It's a disregard for the natural, because what you're doing is you're taking something unnatural, the government, and you're saying it's natural, right? It's natural for me to be on this land, to be naturalized into this country, to be a citizen. You're saying it's natural for you to be in that government. You're saying it's natural for your baby, your child, to be in that government, on this land that somehow is also proclaimed to be of the government. No, the land, your baby, is yours, right? The land is nature's, the baby is nature's, you are of nature. And so if we're trying to make the unnatural natural, it's not really natural, right? We're saying it's naturalization. We're using the wrong term. But we're proclaiming that we need to do it because it's natural. We were born on this land, and this land is owned by this country, this government, so therefore we have to use the term naturalization. But it's totally wrong. It's totally wrong because real naturalization is recognition of being born by nature, since the word literally means to make or conform to the natural, right? To make or conform natural. What are we making natural? Are we making nature natural, or are we making government natural? Are we making man-made authority natural, or the natural authority natural? Because we understand that what is natural is abiding to natural authority, what has always existed. That's what natural authority is. Something that has always been here, right? And so, if we're looking and conforming to the unnatural, we'd be conforming to man-made authority, which is government. And that is, by definition, a disregard of the natural. And so instead of embracing the fact that we are naturally born of our parents and of nature, saying, yeah, this is what naturalization is, we're going to say, no, naturalization is being born in this country by these borders that man determines, by these laws that man determines, by these governments that man determines. And none of it is natural. It's completely artificial. And that's everything that the unnatural does within itself. So this is a really core concept to understand. It's just the simple idea of naturalization. To show how deceived we've been simply just through the use of language. Now, whether that was purposeful or not, it does play a symbolic role because the term literally just means to make natural. And we're assuming when we use that word that it's natural to be in that government on that land. So when we look at nature versus denature, or the natural versus the unnatural, it's really important. I made a whole video documentary about this before if you're interested. It's about an hour or two going into, this is actually a screenshot from a music video, and you see the world is sort of, unraveling. You have different cycles that occur due to reasons that humans are not being back to nature, as it says in the music video, and as it says in many other, symbolic texts and all throughout the world, history. People have been saying these themes for many times. They just weren't able to really clearly put it down on paper or in a presentation like I'm doing here, right? To say this is what is natural, this is what is unnatural. And like I said, I can't even be the one to fully speak of it. I think they provide great wisdom, and I'm going to give them some credit here in this presentation. But it is worth mentioning that I have a video talking about some of these concepts. So that was the thumbnail for that video. Here we're going to go a little bit into morality, right? Because clearly we're making the distinction that what is natural is what is good. And if we're understanding nature as we are to understand what is not nature and what is unnatural, we would understand then what is right and wrong, right? Because we're making these correlations one and the same. But it's really important to look at the terms we use for this, because a lot of people will debate all day about subjective, objective morality, moral relativism versus moral realism, what have you, right? And what's important to look at is if we use the word natural, the word natural essentially means objective. That's what it means. Because if we're looking at something that has always existed, that always will exist, something that humans cannot get rid of, right, which is nature itself, the inherent constitution and all the definition to be mentioned before, then it is objective. But maybe natural is a better term to use, because people might get confused about this word objective. We'll talk about that. But nonetheless, it's objective, right? So we have an objective morality when we look at nature, and we look at natural. What is natural? So natural morality, when we understand what is natural is good, it's basically saying good morality, right morality. What is morality? It's the study of right and wrong, right? So right study of right and wrong, gosh, you can just go down the rabbit hole, right of natural. You'll get lost after a while. But frankly, it's just understanding what is natural and unnatural, or what is right and wrong. And what we need to look at when we look at morality is really authority. Not so much right versus wrong, because where do we get those ideas in the first place? We're saying that is what guides your actions. Well, if it guides your actions, then you're looking at it as an authority. That's what you look at morality as. Morality is really just authority. And so where you get your morality from really matters. Because if you say that right and wrong is dependent upon man's whim and what they write down with law, then you're saying man's authority is my morality. But if you're saying, no, nature has laws and there's rules within nature and God maybe gives it to us or what have you, then you're saying, no, the answer is within God or nature, right? That is where the authority is. So you have to ask yourself, where's the authority, and is your morality based on nature? And so I provide a blueprint for natural morality, which is objective authority. I like to say it is basically natural authority or natural morality or objective morality or objective authority, whatever. These should all be one and the same if we really understand them. But what it is really morality based on nature or truth, okay? Which I mean literally, okay? It's not based on bias, emotion, opinion, empathy, conscience. Empathy and conscience are the means through which humans can understand, right, the world around us and to apply morality. The human sense added to nature, which we'll talk about. When we look at morality based on truth, we're looking at the nature of human beings, for example. And there's a really good quote I'm going to share for more emphasis, but first let's look at the concepts here that we need to understand before we look at that quote. The unnatural or wrong violates nature. The natural or right supports nature. So it's essentially the same thing as the chart we showed before, going over what is naturalizing versus what is denaturing. Okay? Now, this is really a universal morality, the natural moral law, that actually applies to everything. Okay? Actually applies to everything. Again, not just one thing or behavior or this or that. This applies to everything. Everything that exists, anything that ever can be, everything that ever will be. Okay? It is self-evident, as we may say, because the evidence is found in the self. Take, for example, again, the idea that I own myself and you own you. How do you prove you own yourself? Can you prove that? I'm asking you, can you prove that you own yourself? And I'd imagine it could be pretty difficult to show how you prove that by the very essence. So let's look at several quotes here, and then the quote that I really want to show you. Truth is by nature self-evident. As soon as you remove the cobwebs of ignorance that surround it, it shines clear. Again, ignorance is the evil. So, let's look at this quote. The morality of the act I dispose is of as follows. I am myself, you are yourself. We are two distinct persons, equal persons. What you are, I am. You are a man, and so am I. God created both and made us separate beings. I am not by nature bound to you, or you to me. Nature does not make your existence depend upon me, or mine to depend upon yours. I cannot walk upon your legs, or you upon mine. I cannot breathe for you, or you for me. I must breathe for myself, and you for yourself. We are distinct persons, and are each equally provided with faculties necessary to our individual existence. In leaving you, I took nothing but what belonged to me, and in no way lessened your means for obtaining an honest living. Your faculties remained yours, and mine became useful to their rightful owner. I therefore see no wrong in any part of the transaction. So, Frederick Douglass was a former slave and an abolitionist. He was talking here about why he is free and not supposed to be a slave. If he's saying he's not supposed to be a slave, he's intending to say that he's naturally not a slave. He's saying that by nature he cannot be, he should not be. He never shall be, right? And therefore he's looking at right and wrong. He's looking at morality, but he's also looking at nature. This is what natural morality is, and it's looking at objective authority, which can only ever be nature, right? Because we're looking at the nature of the body, which cannot be changed. You can change different aspects within that nature, but that nature that I operate for myself does not change. You can try to make some sort of justification for it. You might attempt to make me robotic. You might attempt to mind control me, but that still does not give you a natural right over my own body, which naturally belongs to me forever, as long as it always has. And it always shall be. So, of course, we can get that confused when we have robotics and mind control and such. But past the confusion, past the ignorance, we see knowledge, we see we're supposed to be free. We're supposed to own ourselves. And that is what Frederick Douglass is saying here. This quote, I think, perfectly sums up what I'm talking about with naturalization and denaturing, otherwise known as right and wrong, otherwise known as the natural and unnatural. These are the same. So many people want to say it's specific. A wrong action does not, does cause harm, and a right action does not cause harm. But is that really the end of the story? Do we say, period, that's it, no exceptions, no gray areas, nothing else? And does that apply to everything? Because I'm saying this does apply to everything, and we need to understand the natures, and we actually can understand that through this philosophy. That, again, you may say, I developed, it doesn't matter. I looked into it, I observed, and you can observe too. We're simply using our nature, which you share, I share, we all share, right? Notice the words he's using here. He says God, he says nature, essentially equates them the two the same. He then says, I must breathe for myself and you for yourself, implying an intention, a purpose, a design. We are distinct persons, each equally provided with faculties, which essentially is saying we're naturally have these faculties necessary, naturally, for our individual existence, for our nature to live on, to be natural. In leaving you, I took nothing but what belonged to me, what belonging is to me, right? Ownership, property, we'll talk about that. And in no way lessened your means for obtaining an honest living. Honest, again, means natural, right? A natural living. You belong with you, I belong with me. Makes sense. Your faculties remain yours, and mine became useful to their rightful owner. Rightful, again, also means natural, right? So, mine became useful to their natural owner. Mine became natural to its natural owner. Because I naturalized it. I said, this is where this is supposed to belong, and this is where this is supposed to belong, naturally, because nature designed it that way. Time and place, right? So, to summarize again, the unnatural or wrong violates nature. And thus, you have this idea of rights that come out of this, okay? Because if we look at right versus wrong, we can understand then what is our rights. The natural or right supports nature. So, natural rights is what you have the right to take. And unnatural rights is what you do not have the right to take. So if I say, well, hey, you know, I do breathe for you. Is that right? Is that truthful? Is that correct? Is that, you know, at all any related to these terms that we talk about? It's just a belief. Right? It's just a claim. But that claim needs to have knowledge behind it in order for it to be of nature, in order for it to be natural, in order for it to hold up and say, this is what is nature. But if it doesn't hold up because it's all based on belief and there's not enough nature to prove it, then, you know, you have to question, is it really natural, right? So when people talk about politics in today's day and age, they often talk about rights, but they can't define them, which is very troublesome because that means that they can excuse and say, well, you know, we can make man-made rights here and there, and oh, well, we can, you know, play man-made authority here and there, and nature's completely disregarded. It's out of the equation. Most of the time, morality's not even talked about, and nature's not even talked about, which is really unfortunate because these two often go hand in hand. But it would make sense since most of politics is dealing with man-made affairs, right? Man-made titles, man-made business suits, man-made positions, man-made buildings, man-made pieces of paper. All of it, from its inception to its growth, right? To its what it depends on, is all just people. It does not talk about nature and morality. If anything, you're giving away your own, saying you need to be responsible for me. You know, and you have the right to take this action which no one else has the right to take. Doesn't make any sense. You're making exceptions to this morality. And so what you have then is a subjective authority. We'll talk about that. But where we talk about the natural or the right supporting nature, we're looking at where you own your own nature, right? Because if I do something that is right in accordance with nature, that is something that is natural, I'm doing something where I still own myself. I still am fully in operation of myself. I'm not changing that. I'm not changing your nature. I'm not changing my nature. Our natures remain the same. We're simply supporting each other, right? Or we're giving to each other, right? But where that's not the case is in the sense of unnatural rights, where you do not have the right to take something. It's where you do not own your own nature. You know, oh, I'll give this nature away. I don't need to use my conscience. This person will do the thinking for me. You know, this person will take care of my property for me. So you don't own your own nature. You're giving it away, right? You're disregarding it. You're ignoring it. And you're saying, well, somebody else should be in charge of it. They can use my nature. And what happens then is you make yourself a slave, right? Or somebody else enforces it upon you, right? Where you did not give it away voluntarily, they're forcing you to give away your nature, to be under submission to them. Now your nature is still not where it belongs, because your nature belongs with you. So whether you voluntarily consent to it or not, either way, it's not right because you belong with you by nature. Okay, this is why it's important to look past just consensual interactions, or just look at harm itself, because there's a wider worldview that relies on understanding nature itself. So if we are to look at then natural property based on natural morality, which again is just objective authority, your own nature you have always had, right? This would be your natural property because what is natural has always existed. So what is proof of your ownership, right? We talked about this question before. How do you prove that? Well, your nature, but let's see what else, right? If let's say I want to say I want to prove that I own this thing, right? Now this thing, it's not me, right? But I'm going to claim that I own this. Now what's going to prove that I own this? Well, did I work for it, right? Did I get enough money to obtain it? Did I voluntarily trade for it? How long have I owned it? These are the factors that have been played out for thousands of years for good reason, because it proves ownership. It proves like, hey, I'm responsible for this thing, that's why I have it, and my responsibility, my proof of responsibility proves that I own it, right? And so you don't really own it if you're not really responsible. You have to question, what do you own? What do you actually own? So I ask these two questions in particular. I say, what do you own, and what do you most naturally own? Because these are two separate things, and this is what has caused a lot of conflict throughout history. So I can say I own this thing, right? But it's just a thing. What about the land, however, right? What if I say this land right here, I own this? Do I naturally own that? Well, maybe there's some duration and some labor involved. That's why we say we own it, or because we need some space to live on. But do we naturally own it? What do you have control over, right? Because in order to own something, you have to have control over it, right? You need to be able to be responsible for it. Otherwise, you're not really in ownership of it, and people are probably going to criticize you about it. And people are going to start to notice, you're going to start to notice, right? You might be in denial too. But this is what proves ownership. This is what proves property. And so what are you to control? Are you to control this thing that you bought with your own labor? Are you to control this body which you have, which you were born with? So you have to question, what is more natural for you to own? Yourself, or your property, or the land you are on? What determines this is the natures, right? What is more natural in each of these scenarios? The land is obviously more so nature, less of yours, because you can't control the land. You can attempt to, but you can't really control the land. There's going to be animals roaming, there's going to be bugs roaming, and you can try to mow the lawn all the time, you can try to control all the weeds, but you know it's just going to keep coming back, right? And it's like a body, you got to be responsible, you got to keep up on it. So, hey, if you do such, you might equate that to yourself and thus say, yeah, it's my property. And same thing with any other thing, right? But what is more natural for you to own? Yourself. You, right? What is natural for you to own? You. That is the most natural thing for you to own. Because let's be honest with ourselves, once we start attaching ourselves to material things and to the land that we're on, we start to cause some conflict, especially if we start to claim a lot of areas of land or a lot of material things. And the reason why is because it is less natural than claiming ownership over simply yourself. And this is why ending slavery was so important, chattel slavery in the 1800s, because ownership of yourself is what is proof of your nature, right? It says, hey, by nature I'm supposed to be free. It's the perfect example, frankly, of not just property, but what is natural, what is intended, what is real, what is reality. And so I want you to just reflect on this, right? What is natural for you to own? And that will make you understand and say, well, maybe I shouldn't be so authoritative or dictative over this and that, or maybe I need to hold someone else accountable because they don't naturally own this or that, but they're claiming to, at the expense of other people's natures, right? That's where it becomes a particular conflict, is when it gets in conflict with other people's natures and their natural natures. Because again, as we talked about before, what is right to take is something that is not, going to violate nature. And so we got to consider other people in this process, right? We can consider our own nature, but what about other people's natures? Not just do not tread on me, do not tread on anyone. So we need to go back to knowledge, because knowledge is what helps us connect the natural with the right and the healthy. It is knowledge because it helps us because it gives us learning to know what to do, what helps us. Otherwise, we wouldn't learn, right? So, what is not knowledge? It's something that deceives us, something that is not actually knowledge. So that's why it's important to discern natural knowledge versus unnatural knowledge. Here you see a quote: "The true lover of knowledge naturally strives for truth, and is not content with common opinion, but soars with undimmed and unwearied passion till he grasps the essential nature of things." So he's not just looking at opinion, he wants to look deeper than that and say what is intended, what is essential, meaning what is necessary, what is natural to the nature of things. The true lover of knowledge, the natural lover of knowledge. And what is knowledge? What is truth? Well, it's not knowledge if it's unnatural knowledge, right? Knowledge has to be natural if it is any knowledge, because that's what makes it knowledge. Again, the unnatural is just the lack or the disregard, the ignorance of the natural. So, natural or positive knowledge, because natural also means right, would be knowledge that is knowledge. Meaning it is something that helps us. It's something that helps us with our nature, with what is right and what is healthy, because we know we need that for the natural. It's necessary, because the only evil is ignorance and the only good is knowledge. That's how we understand nature, and that's how we live with nature. So unnatural or negative knowledge, wrong knowledge, would be that which doesn't actually help us. Something that is not knowledge. It's deception, it's ignorance. It's unnatural, it's unhealthy, it's wrong. Because it's not knowledge. It's ignorance. It's not something that will help us. So if we were to look at the opposite side of natural morality, we have unnatural morality, which is subjective authority, which is not nature, because nature does not depend upon man. Nature will always operate, and nature is infinite. It will always exist. So it's unnatural morality. Unnatural morality, well, we decide natural morality was based on nature, so unnatural morality is not based on nature. What is it based on? It's based on opinion or whim, purely. And the reason why that is because although opinion and whim is of our nature, we're not looking at our nature. We're saying we can just decide what it is. We can be the authority. Again, man's authority is being put in front of the natural authority, which is nature itself, what has always existed. So instead of saying, well, this body has always existed with you and thus you own it, you're going to say, well, that doesn't matter. I claim ownership over you and I wrote it on this piece of paper, so that's how it works. That's what makes it right. This piece of paper, my opinion, or because it's preferred, or because, it's something that I want and I desire, so therefore it must be. Because I want it, right? And if I want it, I'll make it happen. I'll change this and that, and I'll make it happen. Even though that's not what is naturally preferred by nature. It's not natural morality. So it's whatever. It's preferable. It's acceptable. But it's not actually right or wrong, right? It's intolerable. It's but they never get clear on it, because it's all based on opinion or whim, and they're not basing it on the nature or the truth of reality. So if it's not based on truth, what is it based on? It's based on, I don't know what it is. It's question marks, right? Moral relativism. You don't have a direction. Since you're looking at subjectivity, you become the subject. You become the slave. Whereas if you are to look at the objectivity, you have an objective. You have a goal. And you're trying to achieve something. You're trying to become better for the better, as the quote before said. So, man-made rights, which is through governments and man-made law, is legality, is morality. That's what man-made rights is trying to tell people, right? And you can say this is unnatural rights, right? Because it's violating nature, because morality is authority. Naturally, if right and wrong are concepts of nature that are based on nature, that's why. Well, if you're saying none of that matters, let's disregard it, throw it on the rug, don't matter, right? You're saying legality is what's going to replace that. And we're disregarding it, it's going to be unnatural rights, it's going to be man-made rights, and thus rulers become the rules, right? There's no laws in nature that help us dictate morality or behavior. No, it's all just man-made opinion. That is what can rule over everyone. And so authority becomes truth, and as morality. Authority becomes what is natural, becomes truthful, becomes reality, becomes morality, becomes all the terms that we said before. We basically just switch everything off in its head, because that's everything that's unnatural. Everything that's unnatural, again, just takes what is natural and flips it around. That's all it can ever do, because it never creates anything new. It never creates anything new. And let me ask you, does government create anything new into the economy, into the market? It only takes what already exists and gives it to someone else. It only takes and transfers resources, but it never provides a new resource. So why are people always lied to? And why do we associate politicians with lying? And why are politicians involved with government and man's law? Why is there a whole profession based upon creating man-made rights and man-made authority, right? And not worrying about morality, or saying legality is morality, or that morality requires legality, requires man-made, laws telling people how to live their own lives. Well, it's deception, it's dishonesty. This is why people are lied to deceive them, to keep people from knowledge, to, as much as possible, keep them away from nature then, right? And keeps them away from the truth. That's what dishonesty and what deception does, because knowledge is the only good. Nature, natural, what is natural is what is good, right? So that's why you have this picture here of this guy with many masks, as he has so many different identities, he doesn't know who he is himself, because he's created all these different identities for himself. He's alienated not just himself, but the people that he is able to deceive. Because they're deceived, they don't know themselves either. They're all wrapped in dishonesty, so they're all wrapped in the untruth. They're all wrapped in a denatured system. Nature never deceives us, it is we who deceive ourselves. So if I am to look at natural morality versus objective morality, natural morality has an emphasis on natural powers, that being the conscience and empathy, right, that we have as human beings to look at the world and then make discernments as to say, this is what's natural and unnatural for myself to do, based on nature, right? Looking at our relation between ourselves and the natural world. So it's based on the nature of beings. Again, I can only breathe for me, you can only breathe for you. Whereas objective morality is based on superstition, faith or belief. This system, this book told me so. This religion, this ideology told me to do it because it says there's objective consequences or this or that. Do I actually know them? Do I have direct experience? And even if there is, what is allowing me to see that? My natural powers. And what are those objective moralities based on? Are they based on the nature of being, saying that what is truthful, what is correct, is also what is moral? Because then that would fall under natural morality, since morality is based on nature, and not based purely on faith or superstition or religion or ideology, right? All these are related. You should not live your life by faith. You should understand the world around you. In the same way, you should not live your life purely on opinion in everything that you see around you, but you should get more understanding as to say, well, everything around me I see through my perspective, there's still more that I don't see. And there's still an intention within the world that I need to understand, because that's why things happen. And that's why, there's mass chaos, and that's why the world needs to learn, and that's the whole point of learning. And that's the whole reason why there's laws, right? Natural laws, I'm referring to. Right? So, natural morality versus unnatural morality is looking at, again, natural morality is the natural powers based on the nature of beings. Unnatural morality would be based on unnatural powers. Government, law, right? And these are just based on the opinion or whim of beings. So it's not really an issue if we're looking at opinion and whims without the unnatural powers. And if it is just using the natural powers, because naturally your authority would be nature. But if we're using the opinions and whims for government and law, then it can become an issue, because now you're assuming a unnatural authority, right? No longer a natural authority. So that's something, a really important distinction to make, is one is looking at natural authority and one is looking at unnatural authority. And so opinion and whim can be on the side of natural morality, but then if it's still seeking natural authority, it would be still based on the nature of beings, right? It would still be trying to find some sort of objective source or objective answer, because you wouldn't be purely dependent upon a fellow man saying, well, this is what's written down on this constitution, this is what's on the wall, so therefore that's what's moral. So really important we understand natural morality in the face of unnatural morality and objective morality, to understand that there is an emphasis needed on nature. So dishonesty is a really core concept here, as you may see, right? Not just within the world, but because dishonesty is but another word for the unnatural. Humankind has not been honest. They will use law to violently coerce their neighbors. They will use violence for their favor. They will do something wrong they know is wrong, then attempt to excuse or justify it. These are all examples of how humankind has not been honest. And we've been doing this for many years, right? It's not to say that we can't stop doing it. There's many people who do want to live more honestly, and there's people who do, right? But there's people who also don't, and they're able to deceive other people and convince them that their dishonesty is honest. And therefore, when they do that, they're convincing them that the unnatural is natural. Just like in the case of the fake naturalization, claiming that, hey, you're born on this land, on this government, therefore it's natural for you to be under this government. And so we live our lives in contradiction to nature. We live our lives in contradiction to truth itself. So if we are to look at nature and humans and how we relate, I want to emphasize again that nature simply exists. Truth just is. Nature is always what has been and always will be, right? That is the truth as well. Now, you may have different conceptions of what you think truth is. That's fine. I'm sure it will have some place about nature if you assume it's objective, it's something that everybody needs to understand and always persist throughout time. But it is moral, nature is moral, or natural, in the application of human action, of purpose or intent, in facing the unnatural. So, we learn through time our effects and our actions, right? We learn through the time all truth. Therefore, as human beings in this world and learning to adapt in this world like any other being in nature, we must learn to adapt to nature. We must learn our place and what to do and what not to do. And thus morality is formed out of learning from nature. Nature simply exists, but when we add ourselves to the equation, we add the need for morality. And when the unnatural faces us more and more, then we see ever more the need for looking at morality or reevaluating our own morality to make sure that it is on the path toward nature and not on the path toward one of the other forms I talked about before. So, human nature is not a machine to be built after a model and set to do exactly the work prescribed for it, but a tree which requires to grow and develop itself on all sides, according to the tendency of the inward forces which make it a living thing. That which makes it its nature is essentially what makes it its nature. That is what constitutes human nature. We must understand that. Nature for nature, right? And again, if we looked at the nature versus nurture before, that makes sense. Nature for nature. You know, nurture nature, nurture nature, nurture nature. A cycle keeps going, endless. Where new natures are always being formed. And you can have a set programming of, I want to do this, but humans, can they really be programmed? Are we machines? We're not like machines. We're different from machines. We have consciousness. That's what makes us different. But sometimes we might want to say we are like machines, and we can become programmed, and there's some aspects that do make us like machines, but are we machines? No. We're more like the tree because the tree is a living thing. And thus, it requires to grow on different sides, and it requires with the tendency of inward forces, which makes it a living thing. There's more to it than just a machine. And that's why I can say, well, is the human really a machine, or is it a garden? You know, is it more than that? I mean, we were the ones who created machines. So how much greater are we than the machines actually? We think the machines are all this great stuff, and machines can live for a long time, we think. right? Can actually outlast human beings in knowledge and almost every single capability. But does that mean that they're, more powerful than human beings? Does that mean we're more powerful than machines? We need to know the time and place of these things and understand each nature, okay? We do not see nature with our eyes, but with our understandings and our hearts. Again, an emphasis on knowledge. So, here I'm going to show you several perspectives. Just for example, on the left side, you're going to see natural law slides from Mark Passio's Natural Law seminar. And on the right, you're going to see some slides from my Unnatural Law seminar that I did, which is basically the inverse of the Natural Law seminar. Okay? So if I am to look at problem solving, there's a natural way to do problem solving, and there's an unnatural way to do problem solving. And of course, the unnatural way would not be really problem solving. It's problem unsolving. Same thing with reality. How our reality is built. How unreality is built. We're not building our reality, we're actually unbuilding it, right? We're trying to reverse how our reality is built. We don't actually know, right? It says unavailable, ignored, or wrong information. Whereas in the first slide it says available information. So it's very specific. The unnatural is saying, well, we're going to take the route of, that's the nature of everything. The natural is just, okay, this is what it is, right? And you need to understand the whole totality of it. The good and the bad, both, so you can make discernment, you can understand for yourself. The unnatural is just that part that says, I want to ignore it all. Let's just create that unnatural world. So it's one aspect of it, right? You can see this as how reality is built, and this is how an unnatural reality is built. So that's how it works, right? This can be either natural, unnatural, but this is the unnatural. So that is what really is what we're given, because naturally we're given the choice. We're given the choice between creating a natural or unnatural reality, but this is what the unnatural reality looks like. Belief. Same deal here, right? I mean, you got how belief naturally is irrelevant, but unnaturally, disbelief is irrelevant. You have to believe. Belief is relevant unnaturally, right? In an unnatural world. Belief is important because it doesn't matter what natural authority there is. It matters what man can create. It matters what man thinks. Our nature, right? Human nature, good or evil, it depends. The natural law slide says, and that's natural, right? It depends. But unnatural is human nature, right? It's not human nature. It's totally the opposite of human nature. Care, right? The principle of care, the 8th principle in natural law that Mark Passio talks about. Look into it if you'd like. But basically saying that care is a generator to our actions. It's what generates everything that we want to do. We have to care about something in order for it to be created. Well, if we're not caring, we're uncaring. That's the unnatural alteration of care. Principles, right? If we are to look at principles and how, we must live our lives by principles to know what we should do in our life, well, what's the opposite of principles? Having no principles, right? Or principles that are completely broken, don't make any sense, and are not really aligned to any natural forces in this earth. So, no principles, essentially. Transgression, right? There's transgressions. These things are right, and there's things that are wrong. Well, unnatural law transgressions don't matter. It's whatever the people say, opinion, belief. It's totally the opposite. Whatever is the disregard for the natural law is what the unnatural law is. Knowing rights. Same thing here. You can know rights, and then what's the opposite of knowing rights? Well, it's ignoring rights. Ignorance. Again, opposite of knowledge. Respecting rights, right? We can look at, well, should we respect rights? And if we did, we'd say don't steal. Well, what's the opposite of don't steal? It's to steal. So it would be natural to say, yeah, don't steal. That's what natural law tells us. Well, if we disregard and say, well, that doesn't matter, then we're basically saying, well, let's steal. Okay, let's look at what natural law says about exercising conscience, understanding the difference between right and wrong behavior. Okay, well, let's say we're not to look at that. The lack or the disregard of the exercise of conscience is what? The exercise of ignorance. You got the law of freedom, that freedom and morality are directly proportional, right? Freedom naturally works through this means of understanding morality and freedom. Well, unnatural, again, we have no knowledge. Well, we create things like this, the law, in quotes, of slavery. It's not really a law because it's not timeless, it's not immutable, right? It's created by man, and it's the belief that order and slavery are directly proportional. Completely turns it on its head. Say, yeah, we need slavery to create order. Freedom is not order. No, freedom is not morality. Morality is not freedom. We need order and slavery. That's what creates the world that we want. So it puts everything on its head. Responsibility, the same thing here. Responsibility, naturally, you want to be responsible. You have the ability to respond. Well, what's the lack or disregard of that? No response at all, right? Natural, the lost word is no, right? Using words. It's natural to know when to say no. That's how you know no. But if you don't know when to say no, you're always going to say yes. And so that's what the following word is. That's the unnatural. Because you're not knowing when to use the word no just as much as you should say yes. Same way as we talked about before, we know that we can create a reality, good or bad. Well, if we don't know, we're going to just create the unnatural result. And this is the case here. We don't know where to say no, we're going to say yes. So there you see a bunch of examples talking about the good and the bad, or the natural and the unnatural, through the lens of natural law and unnatural law, right? Which is just one perspective, through just slides and different concepts. But there's more concepts that will break down specific to our world that we'll get into. The definition of natural law, I want to make this as simple as possible. Guess what? It really is just nature. Natural law is nature itself. Now, why is that? Because everything in nature operates by laws, which you may call natures within nature. That's it. And how do we show ourselves in action? By our actions. We show ourselves by our actions. That's how we prove our existence. And so nature proves its existence through the world that we see, through the world that we observe. That's why, again, it was symbolized as a flag, nature, when we first defined it. It's the workings of God or the Creator, whatever you want to call it. The orderly universe, the intelligence. That's what nature is. And therefore, that's what the laws are. Because the laws constitute what is nature. That's what makes it nature. And so natural law then is essentially proven by effects, the actions shown. And so if we see that the laws of nature, whether it's gravity or thermodynamics or what have you, whatever laws we discover, there's certain reactions that always happen repeatedly, right? We can experiment, we can understand, we maybe even make equations. We can understand that there are laws and there's effects, and if we do certain things will happen. That is part of nature. That is what nature is. Nature, that's all nature is, right? Everything is a law. So nature is essentially effects all the time. Cause and effect is always happening. Cause and effect, right? That is the law. And so the actions shown, there's actions always being done. Everything's moving. Everything's vibrating. This is one of the Hermetic principles talked about in ancient times. Talk about that too. Sickness, nature's vengeance for violating her laws, right? Nature and law is one and the same, just as much as nature and health is one and the same, or truth and right. And all these terms are one and the same. Okay, I'm saying they're all one and the same. Nature is the law, and if you violate nature, you're violating the law. Because law, by definition, is something immutable, something that cannot be changed. If we're talking about scientific laws, which are laws based on knowledge, based on repeatable effects, right? So that is something that is natural. And so when we look at sickness, it's like, yeah, you shouldn't do this thing to your body. Your body's telling you, right? I'm sick of this world. Oh, my body is so sick right now. Like I can't do this or that, right? And we say these things because of the world and what we've done to ourselves. And what we've done to the world or what we've done to our body, that will determine if it's sick or if it's healthy. That's, again, where naturalizing or denaturing comes in, where the natural and the unnatural comes in. Nikola Tesla, again, a quote, "There is no subject more captivating, more worthy of study than nature. To understand this great mechanism, to discover the forces which are active and the laws which govern them, is the highest aim of the intellect of man. This is what our minds are for. This is why knowledge is so important. And again, you can't have nature without knowledge. I have a phrase for this. Nature is good insofar as it is known. Because you can't make an appeal to nature in the first place. You can't say nature is good unless you know what nature is, what good is. And again, the only good is knowledge. The only evil is ignorance. So when you understand nature, you're creating the highest aim of intellect of man. Because nature is the thing that we need to study. It is the thing that has always been here to study. So what is the natural moral law? If natural law are just all the natural laws that govern, behavior in the sense of I jump off a cliff, something will happen to me objectively. What is natural moral law? Just as simple as the other one. Let's say it's the natural. So natural law is nature. Natural moral law is the natural. And the reason why is because it tells us what is intended to exist, and that is what is intended to persist. And that is as by human conscience and nature. So we're using our natural facilities, our natural powers, as we mentioned before, to learn from nature. This is humans and nature, us and our interactions with the natural world, to understand what is natural to do. So now we're applying morality to nature. So now it's not just natural law, but natural moral law. It's nature plus humankind. Now we got natural moral law, the natural. So now it's not just understanding nature, but what is natural for us to do within nature. Because nature stands by itself, but then here we are as human beings, we need to know what to do. And so again, going back to the chart before, understanding what is naturalizing versus what is denaturing. So naturalizing is something that supports or gives to the natural, and something that is denaturing is violates or steals from the natural. Good nature is worth more than knowledge, more than money, more than honor to the persons who possess it. Right? Good nature, natural nature, is worth more than knowledge, more than money, more than honor. Because having that is the most important thing. And money, honor, knowledge can help you achieve that potentially, right? Through your actions, through your efforts. But that is what we're aiming for. That is what we're trying to do. And it is worth more than anything because that's the resulting condition. It's like building up over time. Like, I'm going to keep working on this, and by the time it's done, it's going to be a beautiful sculpture. That's what happens to your body. You start healing it and healing it and healing it, and all of a sudden it's really healthy. You say, well, wow, I worked hard for this. This is where I am. And it's beautiful to see. And did it really even require that much work in the first place? Did it even require that much knowledge? Maybe not all knowledge is here for us to see. Maybe certain knowledge is not so helpful for us, like in the case of unnatural knowledge, right? Knowledge that maybe distracts us versus knowledge that deals with nature, knowledge that is about nature, knowledge that we're supposed to have versus knowledge that is distracting, not supposed to have, something that just keeps us off track. We'll talk about that. The word honor, I think, is important because the word on, right? Like honest, right? More than honesty, more than knowledge is good nature, natural nature, which you can say is the result of those things. But again, because you're building up to that point. Good nature is often a mere matter of health. I mean, there you go, right? The greatest wealth. You build up your income. Oh, here I got my wealthy income. I mean, there's nothing greater of a wealth than health, which is a good nature. Right? It is having a natural nature, a functioning body, a body that can breathe, a body that can sleep, a body that can eat, a body that can do these things. And we live in a world of which I speak right now, where we can't do a lot of those things. Those things are not so easy to do for a lot of people. Even the most basic, essential, natural things to do. So, what that is then is a lesson of loss. And we learn from loss, so we know what to do to gain. We lose in the unnatural and we gain in the natural, essentially. You lose, you have to use your nature, or you lose your nature. That's essentially another way of saying it. Okay? If you're not using the natural, you're going to lose the natural. And when you lose that natural, you're going to become more unnatural. That's not to say you are unnatural, because you still are natural. You have to have hope and faith and say you can still heal. I'm still natural. I can become more natural. I have the knowledge now, so I can become more natural, right? Now I just need the right requirements, the tools, to become more natural. So the natural, again, is the right, which leads to the harmless, or the benefit, for the good, which is for life, or order. Whereas the unnatural is the wrong, that leads to harm, or danger, which leads to bad, which is the evil, or chaos in the world. I want you to notice that the word life, or live, is essentially the opposite of evil. Okay? It's inverse of the word. And so I'm equating evil with chaos and life with order for this reason here. Because life operates in an orderly fashion. Again, no matter how random you might want to call it, there is a reason why things happen. And nothing happens uselessly, as Aristotle stated. When we do things that are right, we understand that things work out, right? Whereas if we do things that are wrong, things may not work out so well. And then we learn from the harm or the danger we experience, the evil, to hopefully become more natural. And so it teaches us a lesson. The evil, the unnatural, teaches us what's natural, if we are open to learn from it, if we can understand and distinguish the two, right? To then shift our energies toward the natural versus the unnatural, the right versus the wrong, the life versus the evil, because we are not living life if we are constantly enraveled and always trapped by evil. If we're always so distracted by all the disease and all the problems of the world, that shouldn't be there, because it's preventing us from literally living our own life, because it's not supposed to be in our life. It's not intended for life. It's not natural for life. And so we distract ourselves with the unnatural. We lose ourselves in the unnatural. And this is why we say we lose our time. We waste our time because we're losing. And so it's not about winning or losing necessarily in this world, but it is in the long scheme. In the long scheme of looking at the natural and the unnatural, we are losing as a species if we give way to evil. And we have to recognize that. A lot of people may not want to say we are losing, but we are if we're literally giving way to the unnatural, and we don't realize that we are, and we're unconscious, and we actually promote unconsciousness, which is not wanting knowledge, which is ignorance, which is disregard, which is going to lead us to even more unnatural conditions. Knowledge is where we have to start, right? The learning process, wanting to learn, wanting to do right, wanting to do what's natural, wanting to do no harm, wanting to benefit society, wanting to give. So the natural moral law, which is our learning, summarized as do give and do not steal, which essentially then is know what to take. Now this is really important, because you can take without stealing. And in order to give, you might have to take, right? You might have to take in order to give, or do you necessarily have to take at all to give? Perhaps because you're given something already by your nature. But every time we say you take an action, we're saying you take something. Because you are. It's an exchange of energies. Every time we do something, there's an exchange occurring, right? Nature, nurture, nature, nurture. There's exchanges happening. There's changes happening all the time. You need to know the time and place, where to exchange things, what you're doing with the things. Because that is going to determine then what you're giving to and what you're stealing from. And so what you're taking from is going to determine if you're stealing, right? If you're taking from something from yourself, you might say you're stealing your own life. But is that stealing by definition? Interesting, huh? Right? See, it makes you think a little bit more than a lot of people think about. Because giving and taking and stealing, these are concepts that we need to reflect on. And I say do give in a good sense. I'm not saying always give. And I say do not steal. I'm basically saying never steal. So I'm saying, well, you can give, but you also need to know what to take, because it says know what to take. So there is a balance to achieve. There is time and place to know about. There is a sense of awareness as to what you should do and what you should not do. And this fills in all the gray areas, and this fills in every aspect you need to figure out, ultimately for yourself. I can't tell you every answer in this life. But through learning the unnatural and the natural, you can start to understand more as to what you should and should not do, right? Same thing with any other moral code of conduct that people provide nowadays. Some of them are great, right? Some of them can really assist us, but we have to put it in practice. We need to see how much does it work and where does it fall short. Where are there conflicts? Where are there controversies? It usually tells us a lot about the other perspectives we need to see, the evidence that we need to be looking at. So this quote really sums this up quite well. Before you act, listen. Before you read, react, think. Before you spend, earn. Before you criticize, wait. Before you pray, forgive. Before you quit, try. Okay? So, are you really acting if you're not listening? Are you really reacting if you're not thinking? Are you really spending if you're not earning? Right? You need to earn in order to spend. You need to think in order to react. You need to listen in order to act. Otherwise, all those things are not being done consciously. All those things are not being done with knowledge, right? With the prerequisites for what is required to do these things. Before you criticize, wait. Before you pray, forgive. Before you quit, try, right? So it's important that you try before you quit. Because if you quit, then you're giving up. You're saying, oh, I can't do this, I disregard, I'm ignoring the fact that I could try, you know? Oh, before you pray, forgive. Because if you don't forgive, then you're ignoring or disregarding the fact that you need to do that in order to pray. You know, you need to wait in order to criticize, because what's going to happen is you're going to learn over time to say, well, man, I should have waited, I should have thought, I should have listened, I should have earned before I did these things, right? I had to prepare these slides. I had to prepare myself before I did things. But did I expect it to rain necessarily? No. But you know what? Fine, whatever. It's nice ambiance for me, right? Nice ambiance. But before you do something, you should always think about what's going to happen. I thought about, will this rain disrupt my presentation? Will this lighting be okay? Will this audio be okay? For example, right? And so I had to think about all those things before doing them, because if I did it, it wouldn't have come out so well, right? It wouldn't have come out so good, or as natural as I would want it to be for the listening audience, right? Natural to the idea that you watch this to receive something from it, naturally, right? That's the whole idea of putting out a presentation, because it's naturally supposed to give you knowledge, right? But it still relies on you to listen, right? Before you criticize, listen. You know, before you think, well, nothing, I'm not going to get anything from it. Really sit back and think, well, what if you are because you've never heard it before? What if you are because by shutting it down, you know, because you disagree with it? Well, no, you can still probably learn something from it, right? You can learn from everything in the universe. It doesn't matter what it is. You don't think before you do something foolish. You do your thinking afterwards. You do your thinking once you learn your lesson, the lesson of loss, right? Which is unfortunate. A lot of people have to learn from experience rather than awareness for what's going on in the world, right? It's unfortunate that that's the case, but that's the world we live in if people don't want knowledge. They don't want awareness. And this is why it's so important, and even just basic essential knowledge like right and wrong, you would hope most people would have, and this is why we have the whole idea of common sense. Especially for something so essential as nature, we have to question, well, what happens if we go against nature? And this is what it looks like to go against nature. You know, there's this guy getting blinded, and, you know, all this stuff is happening to him. He's trying to navigate through the snow. You try going out there fighting a storm. There's human beings that attempt to, you know, oh, let's do some weather modification and all this stuff to try to change it. You can't change nature. Nature will do what it needs to do, right? And if you cause some changes, you better be very cautious of what you're changing, what you're doing. If you want to prevent something from happening, you need to know what you are doing when you prevent that thing. Because what if something else is going to happen as a result of that prevention, right? We see all the time people are given drugs to say, well, let's treat this one thing, but it's causing another thing, and people don't realize that it would do that. So if you're going against nature, get ready to get blinded, flooded, burnt, cast away, shaken up, or straight up destroyed, okay? Are you ready to have any of those things happen to you? Because if you are ready, then I would say that maybe nature is not so much against you, right? Because you're able to harmonize with it. This is the whole idea that natural disasters are not natural, because a disaster implies that it did harm, it did damage to people, but it doesn't have to if humans are prepared and they know about the disasters and they're ready for it, or they had knowledge that it could happen. Is it really the fault of nature, or is it the fault of the humans who have the knowledge now to say, well, this is how we prevent it and this is how it won't happen to me? You know, like, we can't blame nature for you touching the poison that you find in nature. That relies on your own knowledge of what you should do and not do. So if you get blinded, flooded, burnt, or cast away, is it really fully nature's fault? You might be like, gosh, well, geez, but I chose to live here. So you're going to have to live with it. You're going to have to learn to live with it. You have to learn to prepare, and you have to. Because you can't escape it. Those are the conditions that you are given yourself when you choose to live there, right? So if you go against nature, I mean, just get ready to be flooded and burned and all this, because if you want to work with it, you're going to have to try to work with it, right? You want to work with it, and make it work, right? But you can't change all of nature to try to make it work for your benefit, because we see that often just causes counterintuitive results. It often just causes worse problems. So we need to understand the human role, the human impact in our world. And for a long time, people have been doing that, you know, trying to figure out, well, what works, what doesn't work. And it's just a matter of time. Time tells of all truth. We're still trying to do that. There may not be anything new in nature, because that authority is always existent. But it's not to say that, you know, all those old ideas are not being learned from today, because it's possible that we already had all those answers before, and we just kept sweeping them under the rug. Or certain people keep that knowledge for themselves and keep it away from others. There's abundance of reasons why people are going against nature, and they may not recognize it, or they may willingly do it, right? But the point is that we don't want to go against nature. We want to work with it, and we want to work with ourselves. We want to prevent as much harm as possible. We want to try to live our lives as much as possible, right? We want to live good lives, natural lives. That's the goal. In fighting nature, man can win every battle except the last. If he should win that too, he will perish, like an embryo cutting its own umbilical cord. This is correct, because we are connected to nature, right? We cannot fight nature for so long. We can attempt to, and we can win some battles and say, you know what, we can change this and it'll make it work. But we can't win every battle against nature, because nature is stronger than us, and we have to recognize our role within it. It's not to say we're powerless and we can't do anything about it. It's to say we need to understand our role within it and what we're doing to it. So we are connected to nature, and we are just as connected to nature just as we are to ourselves, or we should be. And thus, when we look at our digestive system, for example, everything is connected in an orderly fashion. That's where you find the order, right? Digestion works a certain way. Ecosystems work together in a certain way. That's what makes it the ecosystem. And so here you see, when we go with nature, and here you may even see man-made stuff, we're working with the natural patterns within the universe. We might be able to integrate ourselves with the natural patterns in the natural universe. So, ready to get healed, ready to get relaxed, authentic, refreshed, aromatic, enlivened. Because that's what happens when we live in alignment with nature per se. Right? We understand that we need to maybe take it easy. Maybe we need to express more of who we are, we need to refresh here and there, right? This is what nature teaches us. It teaches us maybe we need to come back to simplicity, right? Maybe we need to get more in touch with our senses. Maybe we need to become less soulless, or less just following orders, less just going with the flow, and really go with the natural flow, right? Not going with the flow of modern society and always rush paced and going fast paced all the time. No, maybe taking a step back, because that's why people go to vacation in the first place. They go to vacation because nature heals them. Nature is what's healing them in their process of wanting to heal, of creating health, right? So, relevance. It is relevant that we need to look at nature. A lot of people may not think it's relevant to look at nature, right? Some people are still trying to get past that first barrier. And to me, that is a sign of an issue right there. But nonetheless, nature grows more relevant in the face of the unnatural. The more problems, the more issues we run into as a humankind, the more we see nature is relevant to talk about. And so if you think nature does not matter, try going away from it. See what happens. And why would you do anything that helps you? Likely because it assists your nature. And when you go away from it, you realize you need it. And when you need it, you realize it is natural, just as much as it is necessary, right, to have it. And so, vacation, we always go to nature. Retirement, we go to nature perhaps. The point is that you need nature. It's always relevant. Across the board, whether it's the start or the finish, it's one or the other, it's always. But it's because it's always there, and because we can't detach ourselves from it. There's this phrase called nothing new under the sun. Because it's true, there isn't anything new under the sun. But what if people try to make something new under the sun? In the case of man-made objects or man-made ideologies, right? These are things that are attempted to be created as new things, but even they are based on natural things. They just improvised and basically turned it into something else. They took the natural and said, we can do this and that, and it would turn into this, right? So that's what relevance is, right? It teaches us that there is, despite all these attempts to make something new, there's something that has always been there. And it is the old, it's the great, right? We use these terms too, we refer to the great tree, my great-grandfather. We refer to great things as these things of the long past. It's very interesting how that works, right? And there's another phrase that says, it's got to come natural. Because this is another interesting one, right? It's got to come natural. When people say in relationships, it's got to come natural. Oh, like you gotta figure out what food to eat. Well, it's got to come natural to you, right? Because they know it's got to work with you. Not that everything naturally occurring is natural within itself, but the natural perhaps should come natural to make it even more clear. We can make it even more clear. And these are just some of the phrases that my second book goes a little deeper into. But it states here, all the answers are always here. It's just a matter of time to know those answers, right? It's just a matter of time to know that nature is this ever-present answer, or that it's here, and because we need to learn from it, otherwise we may suffer. We will perish because we are not aligned with our own nature, right? So it's just a matter of time for relevance to show itself, for nature to show itself, right? And all it wants, as we talked about before, is to reveal, is to appear itself. And so if we choose to help in that process, that's up to us. We're aggregators, right? Because again, we can't invent anything new. We could only choose where to put our energies, where to put our focus. And so denaturing is an attempt to make new, to be the answer, but it cannot do that. Denaturing cannot be nature. I can't be nature myself. I'm connected to nature. I'm an inhabitant within nature, but so are you. I can't claim to be the God of you or the nature of you, right? The thing that rules over you, that determines how your actions determine. I'm not the law, right? I might claim I'm the law in the case of government, but even then, it's still false because it's unnatural. So there's always going to be that natural law throughout and beyond that illusion, that barrier that's just keeping our progress from moving forward. We're going to talk about that idea of progress and evolution. Let me return to you the important phrase here for this presentation. Nature is good insofar as it is known. Okay, and let's break it down a little bit. When something occurs, when something that others may consider wrong of someone to do occurs so-called naturally, that person who is doing the action also has the ideas that come natural to them of the wrongdoing. So there's a person taking an action, and they kind of know that what they're doing is wrong. But that action came so-called naturally, right? They just choose to ignore the fact it might be wrong, or they don't have enough knowledge in the fact that it is wrong, right? And therefore, in their ignorance, the natural is not actually embraced because they're trying to shun out knowledge. They're trying to ignore the fact that it is wrong or that it could be wrong, and so having that ignorance is what leads to denaturing, right? And so we aren't stupid because nature has us born to utilize her wisdom. We're not here to be stupid on this earth, right? We're here to learn. We have consciousness. We have conscience. We have all these abilities to receive information, to even transmit information like this. Very powerful. So just because something naturally occurs, it does not mean it is natural to exist. And just because something is natural to exist does not mean it's natural to use. So when something exists, right, it's there as an opportunity, and we can decide what we want to do with it, if we want to choose to do anything with it in the first place. Right? We may not want to choose to do anything with it. Like, for example, the poison, right? There's a poison in nature. I know it's a poison, so I'm not going to use it. I'm not going to touch it. Maybe I'll use it for something else. Maybe I know it could be used for something else. But, you know, for the most part, it probably belongs where it is. It's there in the ecosystem due to many different reasons. And it doesn't assist my natural nature, right? For me to touch that poison. And some humans may go as far as say, well, it shouldn't be on my property, shouldn't be in this area, right? Let's get rid of the poison. It causes this problem, that problem. You can question, is it really a problem in that case? But really, you know, that thing exists. And the question is, do we use that? It's a separate scenario, right? It's natural to exist, but is it natural to use? It's like, is it natural for wrong to exist? But is it natural for it to persist? You know, is it natural for inflammation to occur, for insulin to occur, right? For all these things to occur within the human body, which we may consider bad, is that really an issue? Or is it just a occurrence that comes about naturally, but isn't necessarily natural to persist and utilize? So it's important to understand that when we're looking at what is natural, we're looking at the context of which we're talking about for what is natural. It all depends on knowledge, but at least you would know that knowledge is the most important part because knowledge is the good. It's what helps us understand nature and thus helps us understand ourselves. Etymology is a term that means that you're breaking down words of any kind. You're looking at the origins of where words come from and why they're used. So if we are to break down the word Homo sapien, which is the word we use to talk about modern-day humans, it actually stands for the genus of human beings, right? So Homo sapien is the genus of human beings. And Latin homo means man, and sapere means being wise. So Homo sapien means man who is wise, right? Human from Latin humanus means humane, gentle, or learned. So there we see it again, even just looking at the word human, where we are supposed to learn. And what about this? Humane, gentle. Well, why is that next to learning? Maybe because, again, the whole reason why we learn is to help ourselves in our living and to help the world around us. That's the whole point of learning, right? The whole point of, I would hope, philosophy, instead of getting distracted and focused on a bunch of other things, which is why I want to get really specific when talking about natures, which is still, although specific, again, like very big of a topic, of course, because you can apply it to anything. But nonetheless, if we look at genus, from Latin for birth, like gene, to give birth. So genus just means birth, and to think of genes, right? Like we have genes in our DNA and things that make us who we are within our nature, right? It means give birth. And it's funny because we looked at the definition of nature before from natus or nasi. It means birth, born, or to be born. So we see a relationship between genus, gene, and nature in the etymology of these words. They all say to be born, right? And so if we are to really connect a lot of these words together, we connect the idea that Homo sapien is the genus of human beings, then what if we replace the word genus with birth, right? So Homo sapien is the birth of human beings, okay? And Homo sapien, as we saw before, is man being wise. So the nature or birth of human beings is to be wise. We are supposed to be learned, intelligent, wise human beings. This is what we are supposed to be. Now, I'm not saying that's what we are, or that, we can't always be that way. I mean, we definitely can be not wise, right? But in the definitions of the word human and Homo sapien and genus and nature, they're telling us, hey, in order to be wise, you need to look at the nature of human beings, which directly tells us actually our wisdom, because we're looking at nature. So, from dehumanization to humanization, otherwise called naturalization, we are aligning to wisdom. And that is what it really means to be quote-unquote born again. Right? There's religions that talk about being born again and such. Listen, I'm not here to bash different ideologies or different philosophies just because I'm sharing one that I'm here with you, sharing one that most of the world probably doesn't talk about. But I would like to say that by simply breaking down the language of the terms we use, we can literally come to understand that the birth of a human being is to be wise. That we were born to be wise, and what's also more self-evident is the fact that we are born with capabilities, faculties that allow us to be wise, right? We have reason, we have conscience, and we have consciousness. Like I said, we have so many abilities to be wise. There's no reason why we cannot attain wisdom or cannot become a better version of ourselves in the case of being born again, being able to attain the wisdom at any point in time, at any point of life, because it's in our nature. So you can always improve if you are willing to improve, as we talked about before. Here you see, I would quote, "Wisdom is to speak the truth and act in keeping with its nature." So speak the truth and act in keeping with its nature. Not just speak, but act, both, right? Because we need to understand that everything we do has reactions, and words can be pretty darn powerful at times. Absolutely, right? It's not just actions, it can definitely be words too. And nonetheless, do you want your words to be truthful? Because that would be words that are natural. Do you want your actions to be truthful or keeping within its nature? Because if it's of nature, then it's natural. So then if you want your wisdom to be natural, in order for it to be wisdom, then you should probably consider looking at nature, right? Because otherwise, if it's not wisdom, what is it? And that's the question, right? If it isn't knowledge, it's deception, it's ignorance, right? It's something that deceives you. Well, if it's not wisdom, what is not wisdom? And you may say, I don't know, you can say it's 100 different things. There's stories, there's movies, there's all these books about, well, if this thing happens to this human, they turn into an orc, a goblin, and they turn into this demented creature and a troll, and they don't have this sense and that sense. And, each particular type of character within these stories has something that they're missing or something that they need, right? I mean, the stories are endless when you understand nature. And this is why so many, story writers will talk about this. For example, Tolkien from Lord of the Rings. Right? I did a whole presentation on him, but immense knowledge the guy has, and he understands the nature of human beings and the nature of power and greed, and that's why he talks about it throughout his films. And so to me, that's wisdom, because he's able to take this knowledge and speak about it and act about it in such a way that is so powerful and so many people can understand, and so many people are digesting to this day. Here we have another quote: I go to nature to be soothed and healed, and to have my senses put in order. To have my senses put in order. Maybe that's because there's an order within the universe. Again, amidst all the other randomness that you might see. And sometimes, it's like talking about chance, right? Oh, it just happened by chance. Well, chance is but a name for knowledge, unknown. Because nothing really happens by chance. There's always something you need to understand. There's still a cause. There's still some sort of reason why something happened. And just because we don't know it does not mean we should just dismiss it and say, oh, well, what's never could be known. It's the pursuit of wisdom, of human beings who are to be wise, to seek it out in order to continue being wise, to continue being full of knowledge. And so, going to nature to be soothed and healed, we talked about how nature could be that best physician and to be put in order, sort of like bringing us back to our own humanity. So do I have bias in this process? I mean, clearly I'm talking about nature a whole lot, right? Well, nature is biased toward itself, right? I don't need to be biased toward nature. Nature is biased toward itself. If I don't care about nature, nature doesn't really care about me either anyways, right? And whether I care about it or not, it's going to do its thing. It doesn't need us to still function. And so you can look at nature as one big garden or one big machine, and you are one of the gears or the plants, except you don't need to work within that garden, within that machine. It's so great a machine, so great a garden, that it will just regenerate with or without you. It will still operate with or without you, but the question that remains is, what happens when you do work with it? What happens when you are with that machine or with that garden? What power does that have for you to work with the natural forces at play versus go against them? And so this further explains the need of the natural, because instead of going against it, where you might be going off against a whole new ball game, you might be thinking, hey, I could be a part of a new machine or a new garden, right? But certain plants require certain soil, certain conditions, and you can try to join a new garden, if you're a plant in this case, but there are gardens that you need to be a part of. There's people that you need to, be with, because they're going to love you, and that they're going to help you, your family maybe, your friends. You need to work with an ecosystem, an environment that works with you. And this is what we need for the entire world. Except we put ourselves in environments that we think sometimes will work, but they don't. We fool ourselves because we're dishonest with ourselves. And so everything that comes throughout the world is also dishonest, as we talked about before. And so you see this quote that a lot of people say, a body in motion stays in motion. Exactly, right? If you stay keeping with the natural, you will obtain the natural, or at least you will obtain a more natural condition. And there's no reason not to embrace the natural now, or any time, right? And it's funny because people say this all the time with science or religion, accept us now, you can repent, you can do this or that, and there's always time, and just so you can join their game and their agenda. And I'm not asking you to do anything, but nature is asking for you to do something, quite evidently, because if you don't, again, what will happen to you? If you don't listen to the laws that are ever present, ever governing every action, everything you do, I don't need to be there telling you anything. I can only be a guide. So I have bias toward nature, but nature has bias towards itself. And I would hope that most people would have bias toward nature. And I said before, people will naturally have bias toward nature. No doubt about it, right? Doesn't mean it's necessarily a knowledgeable bias. We'll talk about that. So let's look at this chart, progress versus regress. And you'll see in parentheses, regress is also regret. Okay, so if you want regret, you probably want to be on the side of regress. But if you don't want to regret maybe your actions, your world, your body, your condition, then you want to be on the side of progress, which you may also see as evolution, okay, versus involution, where you're not evolving. So here you see on progress, you see there's optimization, sustainability, generation, and that is from the natural leading to or justifying the natural. Whereas regress is stagnation, extinction, or degeneration from the unnatural leading to or justifying the unnatural. This is a really important concept because people will make justifications accordingly to what they know, right? Accordingly to what they want to be true. And so there's a difference, however, between what people want to be true and what is actually true. And so when we look at the natural leading to or justifying the natural, it's like, well, okay, you're raised properly, right, with everything you need, perhaps, okay? And of course, that's a very generalized statement. You're raised with what you need, according to your nature, and that allows for more natural things to occur thereafter. But if you start with the unnatural, it may actually lead to or justify the more unnatural over time, right? So the question is, are we moving more toward the natural and moving more toward the unnatural, right? That is essentially what this chart is doing. You have to use your nature for nature or lose your nature and nature. Because what happens is if you lose your own nature and you are a part of nature, then you're essentially losing a part of reality itself, of truth. And that's because you are within that truth. You play a role in this world. You're supposed to be harmonized within the environment just as much as all the other animals are. They listen to when they should go to sleep, when they should rest when they're sick, right? When they need to drink water. They're pretty darn smart. Human beings will ignore their own instincts and do stuff that they know they shouldn't do. So there's a big difference between the human species and the animal species we'll get into. And people in evolution and people not in evolution, I mean, everybody's sort of missing some of the greater, more holistic views of this, which again relies on the natural and the unnatural. So what we need is sort of a regeneration. I'm not saying a new generation recognizing all this knowledge necessarily, but I'll take that if that's what it means to help us make progress in humanity, to realize that the natural must lead to or justify the natural, and that we need to ever strive to understand what is natural through our knowledge, and thus to obtain more naturalization. But if we just keep ignoring it and say, no, it's not a big deal, man can keep playing God and keep deciding for others and telling others what to do with their lives and creating all these man-made things and reversing how things are made because it's just our playground, we could do whatever we want, then yeah, we're going to be on the side of regress, which is also regret. So here you see another quote, truth can only be seen by those with truth in them. Again, the idea of connectivity. We need to have nature within ourselves so we can have nature throughout, unless you want a confused reality where you don't know yourself and thus you don't know the world that you live in, and thus maybe you want to escape. There's a lot of people who have a lot of mental problems nowadays, right? Suicide, all sorts of things, because of this confused state of mind, because of a world of detachment, of I don't know where I fit in, I don't know if I can fit in, I don't know who I am. And so they feel like they need to take it out. It's their fault, or they can't live with it anymore. They can't live with themselves because they can't live in the first place. So let's look at this, the appeal to nature. In philosophy, here we go, there's a fallacy that is considered the appeal to nature fallacy. And it states that you cannot claim that what is natural is what is healthy or what is good. And I'm saying actually you can if you have knowledge. But there's a big difference between the appeal to nature with knowledge and the appeal to nature without knowledge. You'll see this chart demonstrates this. On the left side it says using knowledge of nature for the natural as right or healthy is the appeal to nature. Whereas the quote-unquote appeal to nature is using lacking knowledge of nature for the quote-unquote natural as right or healthy. Notice I put natural in quotes because it's not really natural because you don't have knowledge to know if it is, and the appeal is in quotes because how can you make an appeal without knowledge? You can't. You need knowledge to make an appeal. So when we look at both of these appeals, they're both against denaturing. They both are against the world of denaturing and people turning things unnatural. The difference is one one has knowledge and one doesn't. So who's actually going to succeed here? And so they both occur for the need of naturalizing, but the appeal, in quotes, appeal to nature, the one that all the philosophers complain about, is for the quote-unquote need of naturalizing. Because they think they need it. They think they need this natural thing because it says it's natural to help them and to create a right or healthy world. They don't know if it's actually natural. It may say natural, and they'll be deceived just because of the word. They'll think, yeah, it's natural, therefore it's healthy. Of course that is an unknowledgeable appeal. Of course that's a fallacy, because it doesn't have knowledge. That's why. But even the Wikipedia and many other sources will say, yeah, actually you maybe can make an appeal to nature if you have enough knowledge. If you can define what right and wrong is and what healthy is, right? What nature is, you can actually make an appeal to nature. But most people in their day-to-day lives, they assume like, oh, it says natural, so it must be healthier. Now, are they wrong to do that? Maybe not fully, because maybe they shouldn't be lied to, but they are. And they don't realize they're being lied to, or they assume, well, if I'm being lied to, at least I'm trying my best. But they're not trying their best because they don't actually know if they're being lied to. So it's important that we make the real appeal to nature and not this fake appeal to nature. When we make the real appeal to nature, we're connecting the natural as right, and it's what the philosophers first understood. First philosophers, I would say. And that is using knowledge against and for knowledge, right? A battle of knowledge, because philosophy is supposed to be a love of knowledge. So everybody shares knowledge with each other, and we kind of discern and understand for ourselves. We be our own philosophers, but we do get the general message that nature is meaningful across the board. We all understand that nature is this place we've inhabited that we need to understand. That is a collective understanding. Everything from there we need to understand, right? But at least we have a fundamental premise for everything else that comes from it. We have the roots in place, the foundation. And we may not have that foundation if we don't have the knowledge of nature, or we don't think nature is meaningful, if we don't have a natural authority. If we disregard nature in total and say, oh, it's not important, then we're disregarding it. We're going to give way to the unnatural. And all of a sudden, now we're not talking about knowledge, we're talking about semantics and politics and all these other man-made manifestations. And we're starting to deceive each other. We're getting away from what we're really supposed to be looking at. And so, Naturosophy is this appeal to intent, trying to find what is intended for us to live in, what is intended to use, trying to find out what is meaning, right? What does this mean? That's context. That is trying to figure out what it is, just as nature is what it is. Truth is what is. We're trying to figure it out. Whereas this fake appeal to nature is just unknowledgeable, and that's what most philosophers complain about. It's ignorance against and for ignorance, These philosophers are like, well, you can't make an appeal to nature fallacy, make an appeal to nature at all, because there's some people who, use it unknowledgeable, right? So they're using ignorance against ignorance. They're being ignorant themselves, attacking other people's ignorance. It's quite hypocritical, because they don't recognize that you could potentially make an appeal to nature, but they never give it even a moment of chance of existence, right? So it's unfortunate, because that makes the idea that nature is meaningless, or that there is no natural authority to be understood. We can't have natural rights or ownership or anything of the sort. And really everything we understand from science and religion, a lot of it came down to the first philosophers. If it weren't for the first philosophers who recognized nature, we wouldn't really have anything else anyways. Philosophy-wise, science-wise, religion, may you argue, right? Maybe you say, oh, well, yeah, we would, blah, 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 but still, the natural world is what we use to observe. The natural world is what we use to experiment, is it not? So nature is always meaningful, but this fight between the people and saying, well, hey, you're using an appeal to nature, and that's wrong. It's just always wrong. And these philosophers are like, well, you got to study this philosopher and that philosopher, and they're not encouraging people to be their own philosopher. They're basically saying nature is meaningless, right? We shouldn't be looking toward this one source and appeal to this greater sense of duty or purpose. And so they're making an excuse for the appeal to denature, which a lot of these philosophers are unaware of that they're doing. And the people, again, who are ignorant, who aren't the philosophers that are complaining, they're also making an appeal to denature because they're not making knowledgeable decisions. So the appeal to denature is really, this is the most important part. Okay, because the fake appeal to nature can give way to the appeal to denature, and the people who are claiming everyone's, oh, you're doing an appeal to nature, they're doing an appeal to denature as well. So, appeal to nature, again, using knowledge of nature for the natural as right or healthy. Well, what is an appeal to denature? It's using the disregard of nature for the unnatural as right or healthy. That's what the appeal to denature is, right? And so it's against naturalizing. So it's the complete opposite of the appeal to nature, and it occurs for need of denaturing, quote unquote need, okay? So basically, let's make a justification to use this man-made drug because there's this man-made disease. Problem reacts solution, right? Hegelian dialectic. Let's just create a problem and create a reaction so we can create a solution. It's all artificial, but it will create the agenda that we want. It will do exactly what we want, and so we're going to do it. And therefore, they're making this appeal to denature humankind. But never within that process are they considering, well, is there a world that's already present with already answers that we need to already consider, and we simply need to sit down and embrace it, and that's how we obtain knowledge. Their knowledge is, let's know our system, our government, our laws, our science, our philosophy, and we get wrapped in ourselves that we lose a sense of nature. So it's important we utilize knowledge. Again, this just emphasizes the fact that the knowledge is the only good. And so if we are to summarize these concepts, the appeal to nature is appealing to natural authority, and the appeal to denature is appealing to man-made authority. That's essentially what this is doing. That's it. This is the summary. I mean, if you're appealing to nature, you're saying, hey, there's this natural authority that we need to learn from. It's called nature itself. And then the appeal to denature says, let's ignore the natural authority, let's just be the authority, let's just do whatever we want. And we can justify it by saying, well, we need a new man-made solution to fix the man-made problem. And you just end up in an endless cycle because you never recognize nature. Again, this is where you have that idea of regress, where the unnatural justifies and leads to the unnatural. And it just keeps regressing into involution until people regret it into back. Then you start to have more progress, right? More progression. But it'll go back into regression if people go back to man-made authority, if that becomes the emphasis of humankind. So the goal is to bring it back to nature in the sense of recognizing natural authority, making an appeal to nature in the real sense. Here I have a video thumbnail about it, the real appeal to nature, defending the fallacy. It's titled Real Naturalization, right? True Naturalization and the appeal to nature, fallacy, right? You can go through fallacies. There's a lot of people who even will say, you know, this fallacy doesn't hold up, this fallacy doesn't hold up, believe it or not. You know, you got to think critically about the concepts. You need to be your own philosopher. But essentially, I made that video and I used some examples of different people who try to make cases to say that the appeal to nature is a fallacy, but even within their own language, they're proving that there's just not enough knowledge. The universal and absolute law is that natural justice, which cannot be written down, but which appeals to the hearts of all. That is the universal and absolute law. We talked about natural law before. We talked about the natural moral law, right? Natural justice, which cannot be written down, but which appeals to the hearts. We talked about how understanding in the hearts is what ultimately how we observe nature, is ultimately how we learn from nature. So instead of us just appealing to nature, nature technically actually appeals to us too. That's not to say nature has feelings for us. I can't say if it does or does not, right? But some of you might say you do know, and other people may say you don't know. But the point is that if we appeal to what reality we live in, to understand it more, then we can better live with it. And honestly, nature does appeal to a lot of people just by its appearance. And all it wants is the liberty of appearing, does it not? Right? Having the plant in your workplace makes you feel better in different studies, right? Drinking certain teas, doing certain medicinals, right? Having certain foods in your diet make you feel really energetic. I mean, it appeals to people. These are aspects of nature, and they do assist your natural nature in the case of providing benefits as such. So, we need to talk about excuses, right? We talked about how human beings will excuse their honesty and to say, well, we can be dishonest. We don't have to be truthful to ourselves. We can live this artificial reality. Well, don't excuse the unnatural. Be aware of the natural. That's the main point of understanding these excuses. And when it comes to excuses, I'm going to give you some examples, man-made examples. So, tech memory. We have memory, right? Our natural memory is in our brain. Tech memory. Well, in this TV, there is, crystals and ways it obtains memory. And so it has memory within itself, right? But what if we rely on this tech memory to remember everything that I want to remember? So let's say I want to remember this day, and I take several pictures to remember that day. Maybe I recorded the whole thing. I was always on my phone. I was at a concert. I was recording the whole concert on the phone, right? How much am I really living in the moment, experiencing it for myself, and remembering that with my own brain? How much am I emphasizing my natural memory, and how much am I giving way independence to the unnatural memory? Or the fact that it cannot be my more natural memory, because once we start to excuse and say, well, the phone will remember everything for me. Oh, I don't need to keep track of things. I'll just put it on my phone. Oh, I'll just put it on this and put it on that. What are we doing when we do that? Do we realize what we're doing to ourselves? Because it's these subtle things that can make a pretty big difference when it comes to not emphasizing the natural. Oh, I want to meet somebody. I want to date them, right? Oh, I want to learn how to date them, and I need to figure out how to meet people. So I'm going to go online. I'm going to go on Tinder. I'm going to go on these different dating websites. Well, what if those things didn't exist? What would people be doing? Would there be more people out and about? Would there be people meeting more others out and about? Would there be more social hangouts? Would there be less scams and, less identity issues? These are the questions you have to ask yourself, because are you excusing the unnatural, and are you aware of the more natural? The things that have always been here for as long as, humankind and, as nature has always existed. And tech memory has not always existed. Phones, glasses, clothes, these things have not always existed. I'd say clothes are probably the longest one on this list, right? And so you're going to notice the difference between these. And then you see, well, why are they more dangerous, or why are they more questionable? Perhaps due to how they came about in time, right? And what they do to us and what they're replacing. So if we look at phones and media, right? Same thing here. Social media replaces our social function, our ability to socially interact with each other. Even this video, right? I can be there in person talking to you. You would feel my senses more. Now, I'm not to say that this presentation is wrong or unnatural within itself to do. It's to say there is a more natural way of hearing that information. There is a more natural way of delivering it. And so that is the more important thing to understand, is the fact that you can do that. Because once I excuse this and say, well, I should always do it through online, then nobody really gets a personal sense of who I am. And no one ever gets to feel my real emotions and real senses, which can do a great deal of wonder. Meeting people in person and feeling out who they are. This is why when people go on these dating apps and start texting people, they actually meet them in person, they realize they're totally different from the way they are in text. Or they can't relate with them, because now they're actually seeing them face to face, trying to interact with them emotionally. So, glasses, another example here, right? And phones, by the way, it's like people act like this is another organ of their body, right? I can't live without it. It's like, basically, let's make an excuse for the unnatural to always be with us. And we see that people have complaints about the health issues that it can raise, especially as they get more and more advanced. And so it's just important to have knowledge of all that, but a lot of people may not care much about that, and then you wonder why the world becomes the way it is. But nonetheless, phones, we use it for communication. That was the purpose of creating it, right? What has it turned into? Is it turning into replacing everything what we do? It was supposed to help us. Is it helping us, or is it not so much helping us? And this is the question with a lot of man-made things, right? Do they really help us, or are they supposed to help us, but they end up doing the opposite? It happens a lot with a lot of man-made things. You'll see as an example. But glasses are very particular, right? And you say, well, Cory, what's wrong with glasses? Come on, man. Are you really going to say glasses are wrong? Well, is it more natural than your eyes? And the answer to that is no. It's not more natural than your eyes. So what does that tell you? That tells you that we shouldn't necessarily depend on glasses. Oh, it's okay people are going blind. Oh, it's okay people are having eye issues, because we got a solution for that. No, it's not okay. It's not okay at all for those things to happen just because we have a man-made solution for it. First of all, that requires a lot of materials, requires a lot of other things, right? And having that fixation on material things within itself is a problem. Many cultures talking about the problem of attachment, the problems with the material world and consumerism. They're not wrong, because all it does is keep us away from the more natural. Again, all of it comes down to the natural and unnatural. So glasses assist the natural natures, right? They assist our eyes to see. So they're not necessarily bad when we understand the knowledge as to what they're doing, but we can understand in the fact that, well, there is a more natural thing to have, which is our own eyes. So what is going wrong that we have to use glasses? Because we don't have to use it. We choose to use it because of something that's happening. So unless we get to that root cause, then we're not really going to fix the problem, and we're just going to have more and more man-made things to try to, supplement is the right word, which is replace something that is missing. So in the case of diet, for example, oh, I don't have enough vitamin D, so I guess I have to supplement it instead of go out in the sun. You see what I mean? It excuses the fact that you can go out in the sun, but you choose not to, right? So you choose, oh, well, I don't have to now because I'm taking the supplement, even though we find out that the most natural way usually is actually the best, or at least it is supposed to be the way things are in the case of eyes or in the case of nutrition, right? The bioavailability in nutrition is usually always better in the most natural form, especially from the sun in the case of vitamin D. So clothes, another example here, which I said is like one of the ones that existed longer than a lot of the others. So a lot of people will look at that and say, yeah, it's obvious we need clothes. But are we just going to say, yeah, it's obvious and therefore no questions at all? We can't just say clothes are always great and all the time we need clothes, let's just always wear it. Because guess what? There are studies showing that, hey, clothes may suppress some hormone function, they may cause some issues, and there's movements out there of people who are like, we don't need clothes, we can be comfortable in our own bodies. And instead of having all these identity issues and needing to get more material things, again, more consumerism, there's a lot of problems that people just don't see with these things, as simple as they may be. Now, obviously, clothes, again, they may assist the natural natures. May it be expression, which may not be as important, right, for a lot of things, but it can help with expression, it can help with protection, protecting ourselves against the natural elements. It can help even with delivery in the case of image, but it can help with comfortability in the case of, let's say, it's raining where I am. There's weather problems, right? There's snow and there's cold air, right? So I'm going to need some warmth, or maybe I don't even need that. Maybe I just need to eat more minerals. I need more protein in my diet. Maybe there's a way I actually can live without clothes. I just don't know because I don't have enough knowledge. So it all relies on knowledge. Otherwise, you're going to make an excuse. Like, oh, I don't know. Well, because I was told to. Oh, because everybody else is doing it. Endless amount of excuses. Endless. But the point is that you can look at knowledge and you can understand that everything that we do on a day-to-day basis has natural and unnatural alterations and forms, right? And a lot of the philosophers were trying to hit at that. They were trying to say, like, here's these polarities, here are these things, and how do they interact? And it sprung up so many great conversations that would have never been made. So the point is to look at these things and realize that we should not excuse the unnatural. These things could help us, right? But we need to be aware of what they're doing. We need to, again, be aware of what we're taking. I'm taking this action of wearing these clothes. I'm taking this action of putting out this presentation. Am I aware of what that's doing? Okay, so here's another example. Man-made law, right? Is there a more natural form of law? Does this need to exist, essentially? And the point is that it doesn't. It doesn't need to exist, and there is a more natural form of law, and it's called natural law, as we talked about before. So that's just another example. But people say, oh, we need man-made law for this or for that. Do they have enough knowledge of natural law? Do they have enough knowledge of how nature operates, or how things would work without certain man-made laws, or how things could work if they made it work without certain man-made laws? And so based upon a lot of these unnatural things and the questions that I pose to you, you can make predictions. Like I said, well, if everybody thinks glasses are normal and necessary, we don't question why people are getting glasses, then we're going to end up with a world full of people with glasses, right? That's a prediction I can make. And guess what? That number keeps increasing. Oh, there's disease, and that number keeps increasing, depending on when there's unnatural things in existence, or things that don't belong there, right? Wrong things that are there that don't belong there. I can make predictions based off of that and say, well, if there's more bad things happening here, they're probably going to contribute to evil because everybody's going with it. If there's a lot of good things and everybody accepts that and recognizes that, then we're going to move in the direction of order. It's what we choose to embrace that is the question. And so by understanding the nature of anything, we can predict the outcome of its embrace. So by understanding the nature of anything, we can predict the outcome of its embrace because we understand its nature. I understand the nature of my hands, right? The way it works and the way I can do different things with it. So I know that if I wanted to, can hold a glass, right? I could hold this glass of water here, right? I can touch this keyboard. I can do a bunch of things with these hands. I can make predictions, and I could even think it through before I do it because I'm in control of these hands, right? So those predictions I'm even in control of as well. And that's another thing, right? Is you can be in control of a lot of those predictions. You have a lot of power in this world. I mean, we are the ones that created all these things, so we can equally destroy a lot of these things. But in the cases of guns, clothes, glasses, right, phones, I mean, these things could be easily replicated, and people will find them useful for a long time, right? People will find them very useful. It's a willful choice if you don't want to use them, but since they're in existence and people know how to make them, they're probably not going to be leaving existence anytime soon. So if you don't like guns because they're scary and can kill people instantly because it's a more unnatural form of a fist, or a more unnatural form of, like it's a fist or a sword, right? It's more complicated than a sword. It's more powerful. Then, you might say, well, man, let's just get rid of all the guns. But you can't do that. It's in existence now, right? It's part of truth. And it's the same nature as a fist. It depends on the user, right? It depends on the user of that weapon, of that tool. Just like technology or anything else, I mean, it all depends on knowledge and how you use it, what you're using it for. The people have that knowledge. That knowledge can be used for good or for bad. The technology can be used for good or for bad. It's really, a matter of what do humans want to do with what is here and what has always been here. And so we decide, let's make glasses, let's make clothes, let's make all these things. Again, are they necessary? They aren't necessary, but can you take them out of existence? It's an individual choice. When you start saying, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, you got to be careful that you're not acting as nature yourself, okay? Because what's the whole point of education if it isn't to share knowledge? And are you educating people if you're telling them what to do with their life? You're not educating them, you're dictating to them. I'm not here to dictate to you what you should or should not do. I'm here to guide. I'm here to provide insight for you, to help you in your knowledge, your journey. And so here you see another quote, all art, all education can be merely a supplement to nature. Quote by Aristotle. So all art, all education, right? And I'd say that's pretty much everything. Education about everything. Art is, say everything is an art, right? Martial arts, cooking, right? Writing, these are all arts to me, right? And so it's all can just be a supplement to nature, because nature actually is an art, it is an education, right? And a lot of these man-made things, the further we go in time, they just seem to be more of a supplement to nature, but yet nature has been here all this time. So it's very interesting to see, and it's something that you might want to start picking up on in your own life. Nature to be commanded must be obeyed. Francis Bacon. And it's a very good quote as well, talking about how we need to align to nature before we decide to be God and decide what we want to do with nature. No, like we need to understand it first. Start with nature and end with nature. Don't just start with nature and then end with man-made authority and end with let's have man control everything, because now guess what? Man's going to be the start of every next person's life, which is what happens with fake naturalization. Oh, you're born in this government, you must be part of it naturally. They're basically saying man's authority is first and foremost, right? It comes first. First thing you learn in school, oh, well, you need to be obedient. Follow your teachers, what they say, right? Follow the schools. If you don't follow our rules, you'll be punished. Stay in line. Okay? First things they learn.